He always dreamed of becoming a legendary and world-renowned adventurer. But his fate was sealed by a unique skill, the humble vegetable garden. Just when he thought his life was over, the soil itself suddenly came alive. Now he's growing literal meat trees, carrots made of solid gold, and even a golem or two. Joined by his lazy sister and his loyal childhood friends, he's about to farm his way to glory. It turns out the world's strongest weapon might just be a bag of fertilizer. Even the mightiest kings will bow before him, because nothing beats the power to cultivate miracles. Our story begins in the provincial town of Arcel as they prepare for the festival of the descending gods. This sacred annual event marks the moment heavenly deities descend to earth, celebrated with immense pomp and ceremony. Upon turning 15, youths receive divine blessings known as gifts, granting them specialized skills for adventuring, trade, or crafting. On the day of the festival, our protagonist, Gio burst into his sister Senna's room and shook her awake. She groggily begged for a few more minutes, but he remained adamant. He demanded to know how much longer she planned to sleep before ripping the blankets off, declaring that today was the festival of the fallen gods. Rubbing the sleep from her eyes, Senna complained that her big brother was being a total bully. Gio gave her some brotherly advice to keep quiet and get ready fast, or they'd miss the morning prayer. Senna stretched and held her hands out like a child, prompting Gio to ask if she was even capable of getting dressed on her own. She pouted at his remark, but Gio could only sigh at how spoiled she was. Today's celebration would mark their transition into adulthood as they received their divine gifts. Both of them had turned 15 this year, and despite being siblings, they shared the exact same age. Senna had always called him Big Brother, and today was no exception. Although they had different fathers, he was born a few months before her, making him the eldest. He didn't know much about his mother's past. It felt as if their mother had simply run out of love for them. His father, a renowned adventurer, had passed away a year ago, leaving Gio and Senna to fend for themselves. On the way, Senna admitted her nerves, wondering what kind of gift she'd receive. Gio chuckled, telling her that only the gods knew the answer to that. Gio hoped his own gift would be enough to kickstart his life as an adventurer, a dream his sister was well aware of. He desperately wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, though he harbored deeper reasons he kept to himself. He reassured himself that everything would be fine. Senna insisted she had a gut feeling that he was destined for something great. Gio teased her for relying on her reckless intuition, but Senna just laughed it off. She declared that as long as her brother was by her side, she'd be happy. Gio playfully flicked her forehead. He told her to stop being a lazybones and start pulling her weight. As they arrived at the prayer hall, he told her he was rooting for her. Gio noticed the ceremony had already begun and urged her to join the others in prayer. Tradition dictated that they pray to the gods at the exact moment the sun crested the horizon. At that moment, everyone seeking guidance would receive a special blessing. Gio watched as his sister solemnly folded her hands in prayer. Senna closed her eyes and fervently prayed for a blessing to aid her upcoming adventures. Suddenly, Gio heard a voice. It was the goddess herself, explaining that while Senna received her blessing, he would be granted something entirely different. His unique gift was called Vegetable Garden, leaving our protagonist completely dumbfounded. Nearby, he heard another young man shout with joy. He'd received a blessing for his family business, while Gio stood there puzzled. He'd never heard of a vegetable garden gift and doubted its utility. Senna snapped him out of his thoughts, asking how his blessing went. Curious about her result, he asked what she'd received. She casually mentioned she'd received the favor of the sword god. Gio stared at her in shock, realizing just how massive the gap between their gifts was. He grabbed her shoulders, exclaiming how incredible a rare sword gift was for her adventuring dreams. Senna, however, blushed at his sudden proximity. Gio quickly backed off and apologized for his outburst. Senna just laughed, teasingly saying she thought he was going in for a kiss. Once she settled down, she asked him again what blessing he'd been granted. Gio hesitated, unsure how to break the news. He had prayed so hard for a combat-oriented gift that would help him become a legendary adventurer. Finally gathering his courage, he confessed that his gift was called Vegetable Garden. Senna repeated the words in confusion, while Gio buried his face in his hands, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Suddenly, their friend Annie burst into hysterical laughter at the absurdity of it. Their other friend, Shifa, tried to scold her for being so rude. Shifa pointed out that mocking a divine gift was disrespectful to both the gods and Gio. Gio stood there, paralyzed by the shame of being overheard. Shifa offered some comfort, noting that even unusual gifts have their uses, while Annie continued to mock his misfortune. These girls were like family to him. Shifa was 3 years older, while Annie was just slightly older than Geo himself. They had both become adventurers a year prior. Annie possessed hunter's scent, while Shifa held the powerful Empress's prestige. She was already a force to be reckoned with, making Geo even more desperate to catch up. He desperately wanted to become an adventurer too, and his primary motivation was his secret crush on Shifa. Annie nudged him playfully, teasingly apologizing for his behavior. It seemed his dreams of adventuring alongside Shifa were crushed, prompting an indignant shout from our hero. "Why would you say that?" he barked, catching Senna and Shifa off guard as he tried to hide his panic. Drenched in a cold sweat, he wondered how she knew. Annie just laughed and turned to his sister, asking to see her gift. As they examined Senna's status, Shifa gasped, "The favor of the sword god." Annie was baffled, having never heard of it. Despite the mystery, the name alone screamed power. Senna was stoked, and Annie immediately invited her to join their party. They were a member short, and Senna was a perfect fit. Shifa eagerly agreed, leaving Senna reeling in disbelief at her luck. Our MC watched in awe. Senna was actually in Shifa's group. He desperately wished he had a combat gift to join them. Swallowing his bitterness, he encouraged his sister to accept the offer without hesitation, masking his own heartache. He cut her off, joking that he couldn't support her with his weak gift anyway. Patting her head, he told her she was all grown up. He told her to work hard, but Shifa caught the sadness in his voice. Sensing Senna's unease, he pulled his hand away. He gave Shifa a knowing nod as Senna declared with newfound resolve that she was officially becoming an adventurer. She promised to visit soon, claiming her goal was to strike it rich and retire early. Our MC could only stare, baffled by her ambition. Once she departed, a wave of loneliness hit him. He never realized how much he'd actually miss her presence. While she moved toward a grand adventure with Shifa, he remained trapped in a cycle of envy and depression. Wandering into the garden, he brooded over his gardener gift. What use was a farming skill to an aspiring warrior? He didn't even have a plot of land to till. But as he cursed his luck, a mysterious voice suddenly resonated within his mind. The voice asked if he wished to designate this area as his garden. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to glow. Panic set in. Was he losing his mind? He looked around frantically, but he was completely alone. Where was that voice coming from? And why was that patch of ground flashing? Suddenly, the voice returned, asking if he wanted to designate the area for a vegetable garden. Was he hearing things? He stared at the glowing earth, hesitating as he contemplated whether to actually turn this into a garden. After a moment of uncertainty, the protagonist made his choice, and the system voice confirmed his command. Instantly, the soil before him transformed into a rich, dark loam. His shock was absolute. Kneeling down to inspect the change, he was stunned to find the earth had become incredibly soft and fertile. This was insane. A barren patch had become a perfect garden bed in the blink of an eye. He muttered to himself, wondering what the next step was. Right on cue, a translucent system window flickered into existence, displaying his stats. Geo's vegetable garden, level 1, no skills. The protagonist was completely floored. He had actually gained a personal home garden. The voice then prompted him to begin cultivation, presenting a massive list of options: wheat, potatoes, tomatoes, garlic, cucumbers, barley, carrots, eggplant, bok choy, and more. Every crop was listed as average quality. Realizing he could customize his harvest, he decided to dive in and test the system's limits. A start button appeared in his vision. After selecting potatoes, the system asked for the specific quantity and the exact location for the planting. After inputting his preferences, he settled on 150 potatoes, designating the far end of the plot for the first batch. The system illuminated the target area, asking for a final confirmation. Still reeling from the magic of it all, the protagonist gave the go-ahead. The process began immediately. Geo watched with a bewildered smile, realizing he was growing crops without having to plant a single seed himself. He laughed at the absurdity of it. If farming was this easy, it felt like cheating. Still, since it cost him nothing, he figured he might as well experiment. He decided to diversify his plot. With 50 squares available, he planned to plant 10 different varieties of crops to maximize his yield. He assigned 5 squares to each variety. Once the task was complete, he stood back, though the ground still looked largely the same. He assumed he was finished, but the logic felt more like a video game than reality. He planned to check back later, but then something incredible happened. A tiny sprout broke through the soil, and within a single hour, the entire patch had exploded into a lush, magnificent vegetable garden. A normal farmer would have spent months toiling for this result. He realized this had to be the true power of his unique gift. Reaching out to touch the produce, he found the vegetables weren't just plentiful. They were incredibly fresh, vibrant, and ready for harvest. Our protagonist wondered if it was time to harvest, but a mysterious voice beat him to the punch. He was stunned. Could this voice actually read his mind? Deciding not to overthink it, he confirmed that he did indeed want to harvest. The moment the words left his lips, the vegetables began flying into baskets and containers all on their own. Gio stood there in absolute shock as the crops gathered themselves. It was as if the produce was packing itself away by magic. In the blink of an eye, every single container was brimming with the fresh harvest. Gio knelt down, inspecting the sheer volume of the haul. He stared at his hands, reflecting on the voice and the land that had been plowed in an instant. From the RPG-like levels and skills to the crops that grew at impossible speeds, these bizarre phenomena were stacking up one after another. Now, with vegetables harvesting themselves before he could even process the thought, he realized just how insanely convenient his new life was, and he was absolutely thrilled. Once he calmed his nerves, Gio reached out to see if these magical plants were actually edible. He picked up a tomato, noting that it looked like the most perfect specimen he'd ever seen. He took a tentative bite and was immediately overwhelmed by the flavor. It was divine. He studied the cross-section of the fruit in his hand, noting the rich, gelatinous texture and a perfect balance of sugary sweetness and sharp acidity. Every other vegetable he sampled was of the same elite quality. It was an agricultural miracle. Meanwhile, Senna and her companions finally arrived at the clearing. Senna beamed with joy at the breathtaking meadows, as Shifa mentioned a nearby dungeon ruled by Lord Arcel. While the labyrinth was a death trap crawling with demons, it was also a goldmine for rare and valuable materials. Most adventurers braved these depths for quick riches, but for Senna, it was the simple thrill of her first time outside the city. Annie dampened her excitement, reminding her she was a total novice who needed combat experience to survive. Senna brandished her brand new blade, earning a nod from Shifa, while Annie hoped the girl's natural talent would shine through. Suddenly, the air shifted as Annie mentally triggered her demon presence ability. In response to the skill, a lone goblin emerged from the shadows. Shifa panicked at the sight of the monster, but Annie reassured her. This was the perfect target for a beginner's first hunt. Annie told Senna to brace herself, and the protagonist's sister swung her blade with surprising explosive force. "What was that?" Annie gasped, while Shifa struggled to even track the movement of the girl's weapon. Overwhelmed with excitement, Senna laughed, realizing that with this power, she could actually take the monster down. But as Senna charged recklessly, her companions shouted in alarm, terrified she was leaving herself wide open. Senna ignored the warnings, confident that she had the skills necessary to crush the creature on her own. The goblin retaliated by hurling a jagged projectile, catching Annie off guard as she watched the attack fly. Shifa screamed a warning just as the confused girl barely managed to raise her sword in a desperate guard. The projectile sparked against the steel, sending a jolt through her arms as she let out a sharp cry. Regaining her footing, the young adventurer delivered a decisive horizontal slash, decapitating the goblin instantly. Her allies stood frozen, completely dumbfounded by the raw display of power they had just witnessed. Turning back with a triumphant grin, Senna cheered that they had secured their first win. "We did it! This is our victory!" she shouted, leaving a stunned Annie lost in thought. Her courage to face a monster alone was impressive, but her incredible strength and dynamic vision allowed her to easily deflect a thrown stone with her blade. Her resolve to slay a living creature, even a demon, without hesitation, combined with her innate swordsmanship, was simply baffling. Meanwhile, Senna retrieved the loot dropped by the goblin and wondered what it could be. It seemed a new prodigy had emerged that evening. Later, Senna returned home and called out to her brother to let him know she was back. Delighted to see her, he mentioned dinner was ready and asked about her first adventure. She casually mentioned it was fun and that she'd fought a demon. The weight of her words suddenly hit him. He spun around in shock, frantically asking if she was hurt or okay. Senna just giggled at his overreaction. Resting her chin in her hands, she told him seriously that he worried too much since her sisters were there and demons are weak. Despite it being her first time wielding a sword, it felt natural. Seeing her talent, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy for her gift. He served her a plate, offering it as a reward for her first success. Senna's eyes lit up at the sight of the hearty stew. He smiled, knowing he'd used fresh vegetables from their garden so they didn't have to ration, even if meat was still scarce. He wished his sister a bon appetit, curious to see how his cooking turned out. She took a bite and stared at the plate in stunned silence, making him ask anxiously, "Is something wrong?" But she looked up with sparkling eyes, exclaiming that it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. She eagerly asked what kind of stew it was, praising the incredible flavor of the vegetables as he smiled. He agreed that today's meal was special. Seeing her enjoy the unusual stew so much, he decided it was time to try a bite himself. Taking his first spoonful, he realized the quality was truly on another level. Senna continued devouring her dinner, raving about the rich, sweet flavor of the vegetables. He had to agree. They were incomparable to anything they'd eaten before. His sister couldn't stop praising the meal. Happy that she was satisfied, he listened as Senna finally asked him a question. She couldn't believe the quality. Where did these vegetables even come from? Gio offered to reveal his secret. He prepared to explain his grand experiment, but his sister wasn't interested in a lecture. She cut him off mid-sentence, demanding second helpings. Gio felt a bit silly for expecting her to actually listen. After the feast, Senna patted her full stomach with a satisfied sigh. Gio beckoned her outside for a proper explanation. Leading her to the backyard, Senna gasped at the sight of the lush garden. Gio revealed that their dinner was harvested right here. She was stunned. Was this the true power of his gift? Gio confirmed it, noting how much they'd save on groceries. Senna beamed at the prospect of eating like royalty every day, and her sheer joy caught him off guard. He initially hoped for a combat gift for his adventures, but seeing her this happy made it all worth it. His garden was proving to be far more incredible than he imagined, especially after such a satisfying meal. Senna laughed with delight, her mouth already watering at the thought of tomorrow's breakfast. Suddenly, a small stone tumbled from her pocket and landed in the soil. Gio stared at it, wondering what it was. Senna explained it was a magic stone she found during her quest. Suddenly, a mysterious prompt appeared in Gio's mind. The system asked if he wanted to use the item. Gio's eyes widened. This was his chance to test the limits. He picked up the gem, confirming with Senna that it was a concentrated mass of mana. She nodded, confused as he asked to keep it. Senna agreed, curious about his plan. Carefully, Gio placed the glowing stone onto the tilled earth. The system confirmed the item was consumed. Gio watched in anticipation, marveling at the sheer potential of his skill. He held his breath, wondering what would sprout this time. The transformation happened in the blink of an eye. A massive, bizarre tree erupted from the ground right before his very eyes. It looked like a standard oak at first, but instead of typical leaves or fruit, thick, juicy slabs of meat hung from every branch. Gio stood there, completely speechless at the sight. He realized his gift was a supreme vegetable garden, an incredible ability to manifest fields and reap bountiful harvests. After applying a magic stone, a literal meat tree sprouted. He wondered what kind of insane power he'd actually stumbled upon. Meanwhile, Senna and her party were busy slaughtering monsters in a dungeon near the city of Ars. Catching her breath after the skirmish, Senna sighed, exhausted by the endless waves of demons. Annie noted the monsters were dying instantly, while Shifa added that as long as Senna was leading, they were ready for some serious exploration. Suddenly, the protagonist's sister spotted a magic stone and eagerly claimed it as her own. Annie was skeptical of the small gem, but Senna laughed, explaining it was a souvenir for her older brother, Fergio. Shifa asked how he was holding up, recalling how devastated he looked during the gift appraisal ceremony. He'd dreamed of being an adventurer, but his gift just wasn't meant for combat. Senna, however, insisted he was doing just fine at home. She boasted that her brother's gift was so incredible, he could practically take over the entire world. Her allies stared in shock, wondering exactly what kind of garden she was talking about. They couldn't fathom a garden that could conquer the globe. Later, when Senna returned home, she broke some news to her brother. Fergio practically jumped out of his skin, frantically asking if Shifa was really coming over. Annie and Senna watched as he began sprinting around the house in a panic, shouting that they needed to clean everything immediately. He was overwhelmed with nerves. It had been far too long since Shifa had visited his home. He desperately wanted to impress her, but her stoic, cool-headed nature made her incredibly difficult to read. He agonized over the fear of disappointing her, until Senna, annoyed by his constant pacing, finally snapped at him. She told him to shut up and listen for once. Her friends weren't coming for him. They were coming to see his legendary garden. The garden? He repeated, stunned. He hoped his produce would be enough to satisfy them, and Senna assured him they'd love it. He figured that if eating made Senna this happy, Shifa would likely feel the same way. Our hero declared that if that were the case, he'd have to upgrade the garden even further, earning an enthusiastic cheer from Senna. A short while later, the siblings reached the plot and stood in awe of their flourishing meat tree. As he looked around, he realized that this place had transformed into something far beyond an ordinary garden. Senna suddenly remembered something and held out her hand, offering him more magic stones, much to his delight. He was right on the verge of a breakthrough when the system notified him he'd reached level 2, with his garden area maxed out. Despite having no combat skills, he realized he could use magic stones to expand the garden's reach and increase the variety of crops he could grow. It all clicked. Now he could even produce meat. Without hesitation, he began placing the stones onto the soil. Unsure of what to expect this time, he decided to focus entirely on leveling up his domain. When the system voice asked if he'd like to use the stones, he agreed to use them all, leaving Senna wondering who on earth he was talking to. As she sat beside him, the system confirmed the process had begun, while Senna watched on in total confusion. She couldn't understand why the stones were vanishing, but 10 seconds later, the system announced he had already reached level 3. Overjoyed by the progress, he listened as the voice explained he could now further expand his territory and cultivate new species. Eager to see his new options, he pulled up the menu to browse the available upgrades. He noticed several new additions that looked like ordinary vegetables: burdock, perilla, and sweet potatoes, names he'd never heard. He asked Senna about them, but she just looked at him, completely puzzled. He realized Senna wouldn't know any better, but she took offense to his tone, asking if these were some kind of exotic delicacies. If they could actually harvest food like that, it would be a game changer, so he decided they should try planting them immediately. Soon after, Senna cheered at the sight of the new sprouts, and he confirmed that their garden had officially expanded. Sitting by the fresh crops, he looked closely, wondering if this was truly a sweet potato or some strange variation of it. Senna encouraged him to give it a taste, and as they cooked it, the vegetable turned a vibrant, rich purple. To Gio's shock, the secret lay entirely in the rich infusion of flavors used during the steaming process. Senna took a bite of the newly harvested crop and was instantly mesmerized by its incredible taste. She marveled at its sweetness and superb texture, while Gio, after taking a taste himself, realized this wasn't just a vegetable. It was a gourmet appetizer that could easily pass for a dessert, leaving Senna to declare that his gift was truly divine. She had never experienced anything like it, prompting Gio to explain that with more magic stones, he could create even greater wonders. Between mouthfuls, Senna eagerly offered to find more materials, leaving Gio stunned that the usually lazy girl was now this motivated. As she gathered stones, Gio's garden level soared, unlocking the gardening art, just as a crucial new system message caught his eye. Eventually, the day of the big visit arrived. Shifa apologized for the intrusion, while Annie hoped they weren't running late. Gio assured them it was no trouble at all, while Senna enthusiastically ushered them inside, insisting they were always welcome. Watching Shifa enter, Gio couldn't help but feel as though a literal angel had just graced his home. After leading them in, he thanked Shifa for being kind enough to make the trip out to see them. Annie sarcastically reminded him she was there too, leading to a playful banter where she jokingly threatened him for ignoring her. Gio hoped the garden wouldn't disappoint, but Shifa and Annie were already hyped up by Senna's rave reviews, much to Gio's humble embarrassment. Annie remained skeptical, sarcastically questioning if the garden could really be as legendary as Senna claimed. Doubting that a simple vegetable plot could be that impressive, she marched toward the garden with Shifa following close behind. However, the moment they laid eyes on Gio's handiwork, their skepticism was instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. Annie gasped in disbelief, unable to process the incredible sight before her. It wasn't just a plot. It was a flourishing paradise, and the girls immediately began inspecting the various crops. They were awestruck by the sheer diversity of the harvest, ranging from vibrant greens to exotic produce. They found everything from crisp vegetables and sweet fruits to a surprising variety of rare mushrooms. Everything was thriving, and Senna couldn't help but notice the new fence, remarking that the garden used to look far more dilapidated. Annie was visibly stunned by the transformation, asking our hero if this was truly all his handiwork. He confirmed it was, remembering that at level 5, he'd unlocked a specialized fence-making skill, allowing him to fortify his perimeter in an instant. It was the perfect deterrent for prying eyes. Annie admitted she had completely underestimated him, never imagining he could construct such an elegant and sturdy barrier so quickly. Surveying the plots, she noted the crops seemed immune to the seasons. Senna asked if such strange plants were normal, leaving Annie speechless. Our protagonist smiled, thinking about how delicious the harvest looked. Just days ago, she had mocked his gift, but now she was staring in pure disbelief. He then turned his attention to Shifa, who remained characteristically stoic. He couldn't tell if she was bored, angry, or perhaps just unimpressed. Curious, our MC decided to ask for her honest opinion, and to his shock, she responded with genuine wonder. He mentally celebrated. He'd actually managed to impress her. However, he wondered if she was just being polite. To test the waters, he offered them a taste of the garden's bounty. She accepted with a grateful nod, but little did they know the real surprise was still waiting. Annie hesitated, asking if they were truly allowed to sample the goods. He nodded, noting it was finally harvest time. He led them toward the orchard, a playful smirk on his face as he introduced his newest addition. Behold, the meat tree. The girls were struck dumb, staring at the branches in complete and utter bewilderment. Annie was convinced she was hallucinating, while even Shifa had to admit that actual meat was indeed growing from the wood. Our MC chuckled, admitting he was shocked at first, too. Annie, baffled by his composure, demanded to know how he could be so casual. Meat growing on trees defied all logic, but with his gift, the impossible became reality. Even Senna chimed in, confused if meat grew anywhere else. Regardless of the logic, the MC knew the results were delicious. It was time to harvest, so he asked them to wait just. Annie felt like she was finally losing her mind as she watched the scene unfold before her eyes. The produce began gathering itself into piles, and even the harvested meat started moving on its own. She gasped as the meat jumped straight into a basket, while Gio casually remarked on how convenient it was. Annie snapped back indignantly, arguing that convenience wasn't the issue here. She demanded to know what kind of supernatural madness was actually happening in this garden. Despite their confusion, the girls couldn't help but notice the quality of the meat in the basket. It looked incredibly fresh and delicious, prompting Gio to suggest they have a barbecue right then and there. Senna loved the idea, but a skeptical Annie turned to Shifa, wondering if this stuff was even safe to eat. Gio figured that no matter how good it looked, they'd be too grossed out by its magical origins to try it. To his surprise, Shifa was eager to taste it, leaving both him and Annie completely stunned. Shifa gave her partner a reassuring smile, telling her it was fine because it was a gift from Gio. She then offered to help with the cooking, taking over the meat prep while the rest of the group joined in. Gio asked Annie to handle the vegetables, and she reluctantly headed off to start gathering them. She shrieked when the veggies moved on their own, but soon the mouth-watering aroma of the grill had everyone drooling. As they watched the meat sizzle, Senna cheered for the amazing smell, and Gio finally declared it ready. Senna was ready to dive in, but Gio decided that Shifa should be the first one to try a piece. He carefully served her a portion, warning her that it was still piping hot as Annie watched on. Still hesitant, Annie asked if she was absolutely sure about this, but Shifa didn't offer a verbal reply. Instead, she simply closed her eyes and brought the mysterious food to her mouth. Gio watched with bated breath, unable to look away as he waited for her final verdict. He couldn't even imagine what her reaction would be once she finally tasted the meat. "It's incredible," Shifa whispered in amazement, overwhelmed by the rich flavor. Our protagonist rejoiced as he watched her pleasantly surprised expression. The flavor was divine, and Annie couldn't believe her eyes. Senna excitedly asked Shifa if she truly liked it. Smiling sheepishly, he remarked how glad he was that she enjoyed it, while she claimed she'd never tasted anything better. Laughing, Senna suggested that Annie try some as well, and she finally took a bite. Though she was skeptical at first, she was immediately stunned by the tender, melt-in-your-mouth texture. She began devouring the meal greedily, unable to fathom that such high-quality meat actually grew on a tree. Closing her eyes in pure bliss, she declared the beef and pork to be perfect, while Shifa praised the vegetables. Senna felt like she could eat everything in sight, but the protagonist soon offered them some dessert. He presented a fresh sweet potato pie, much to his sister's absolute delight. "Is that the same tasty vegetable from earlier?" Annie asked, curious about this sweet potato. It was a name she'd never heard before, but she was shocked it came from the same garden. As the guests dug into the dessert, a wave of pure satisfaction washed over the room. Everyone agreed it was incredibly delicious, leaving the protagonist beaming with pride. Having never tasted anything like it, Shifa was all smiles as she savored every bite. The pie was as sweet as honey, making Senna cry out with the pure joy of a child. The huntress marveled that such treats came from a garden, while the girls eagerly asked for seconds. Watching her friends devour the pie, the protagonist's sister laughed, boasting that her brother's gift was truly top tier. Without a second of hesitation, the girls couldn't help but agree. Later, as our protagonist and Shifa pulled away from the group to talk privately, he boasted about how wonderful the garden was, noting the incredible variety of delicious produce. Shifa replied that God had blessed him with a magnificent gift, offering a radiant smile as she praised his work. The MC was practically melting. He couldn't believe such a beautiful girl was actually smiling at him. Overjoyed, he blurted out that he had cultivated everything specifically with her in mind. Shifa's smile faltered, her expression shifting to one of sheer bewilderment at his bold claim. Realizing his blunder, the protagonist became flustered and immediately began to backtrack, denying everything. He urged her to keep eating so nothing would go to waste, still worrying if he was being a proper host. However, seeing the girl's genuine joy, he realized his gift had truly made them happy. Watching Shifa's smile, he began to wonder if any of this would have even been possible without the incredible, mysterious power of his garden. As they finished their meal, Annie noted that despite how delicious the food was, there was a logistical problem. She asked if it was even possible to consume such a massive harvest. Gio admitted that even with his sister's massive appetite, the crops grew far too quickly for them to keep up with. Since they couldn't eat it all, Annie looked at him intently and said she had a special request. She asked if she could use the surplus produce from his garden for her restaurant. Senna was shocked by the idea, and the protagonist was equally stunned to learn her parents owned an eatery. Arriving at the location later, the protagonist was shocked to see a massive crowd gathered outside the building. The line was enormous. Suddenly, two beauties in provocative outfits, Marsa and Lita, emerged from the restaurant and began inviting the eager customers inside. As more customers were lured in, the realization finally clicked for him. Upon closer inspection, he noticed a recurring theme. Every single patron in the establishment was a man. Marsa then approached, giving a playful wink as she teased him, asking if he'd like to join them. She mentioned that her sister was eager to have him dine at their establishment. Caught off guard, he began to politely decline the girl's invitation. Just then, Annie's irritated voice cut through the air, calling out to him. She demanded to know why he was stalling when they had a meeting to attend. He muttered a quick excuse about being curious, prompting Marcia to laugh and wave him goodbye. He noted that Annie's house was located directly across the street. He explained that he hadn't realized a new restaurant had opened nearby, sparking his interest. The pair soon arrived at Lucas's restaurant, which also served as Annie's family home. Stepping inside, he asked if they were still serving, but Annie's tone turned somber. She explained that a new competitor had stolen their business, leaving the place a ghost town. With their father gone and Annie frequently away, her sister was struggling to keep things afloat. "Alicia," he whispered, recalling how she had always dedicated herself to the shop. She had always been so kind and resilient. Just then, he heard Alicia's voice. She apologized for the delay and warmly welcomed them into the restaurant. Our hero turned toward the sound of her voice, but he was instantly struck dumb. He found himself completely flustered by the girl's stunning appearance. Annie lashed out at her sister in a fit of rage. She demanded Alicia change immediately, but Alicia, completely unfazed by her revealing attire, fired back. She argued that with the neighboring restaurant siphoning their profits, they had to match their tactics. That meant dressing just as provocatively. Our hero was stunned. She was essentially wearing nothing but an apron. Alicia struck a seductive pose and teased the protagonist, asking for his opinion. He hesitated, caught off guard. Flushed with embarrassment, he admitted it was a bold look, but she looked incredible. That was the final straw for Annie. She apologized for the outburst, but insisted this strategy was doomed. The plan had a fatal flaw. Pointing a finger, Annie bluntly told her sister she lacked the assets to pull it off. She claimed it was impossible to seduce anyone without a more developed figure. Alicia collapsed in a heap of shame. She burst into tears, wailing that if she wasn't enough, then Annie would have to wear the outfit too. Annie was horrified. What kind of insane logic was that? She wanted no part of this ridiculous scheme. Alicia smiled through the tears, claiming Annie's curves would be an absolute sensation and everything would work out. Annie continued to protest, while the protagonist realized he needed to step in and say something to stop the chaos. Burning with shame, Annie looked at him, desperately hoping he hadn't taken the suggestion seriously. As he struggled to find the right words, Alicia gave him a sharp, painful poke in the side. Alicia pivoted to a somber tone, reminding Annie that as the adventurer, she should be taking charge. Annie was outraged by the implication. She cared about the shop just as much as anyone else. She wanted to contribute, but she didn't think going to such extremes was necessary for their success. She argued that they should focus on the quality of their food rather than relying on gimmicks. However, Alicia pointed out the harsh reality. Their menu was generic and couldn't compete as it was. The restaurant itself was far too modest, and if things continued at this rate, the legacy they inherited from their father would surely crumble. Gio couldn't stand seeing them suffer. He was stunned by Alicia's distress, knowing how much this place meant to both sisters. He envisioned a future where he and Senna could return to see these sisters smiling again. Clenching his fists, he spoke up with newfound resolve, addressing Alicia directly. He revealed that Annie was the one who had reached out and invited him there today. He believed his unique gift could turn their luck around, harboring a quiet hope that he would be the ultimate savior of their family restaurant. Reaching into his bag, he revealed the contents, leaving Alicia completely breathless. "I've brought a variety of ingredients," he noted, while Annie added that they were all fresh from his garden. After tasting them before, she knew they were top tier. Alicia inspected the produce, stunned by their unnatural vibrancy. Intrigued by the burdock and perilla, she asked for details, and Gio explained their uses. Then, she spotted something else. "Wait, is this actually rice?" she gasped in disbelief. "Real rice?" She had heard legends of the grain but had never seen it in person. Annie confirmed its identity, noting its extreme rarity. It wasn't grown locally and was almost never imported, making it a luxury. Gio was baffled by its high status. Alicia noted that the rice she'd heard of was brown and dull, not this shimmering white. Gio was equally confused. It turned out to be perfectly polished rice. Alicia was floored, demanding to know what kind of magical garden he ran. Annie even chimed in, mentioning how meat literally grew on the trees there, making Alicia question reality. Gio simply shrugged it off, prompting the girls to get down to business and start cooking with the haul. Annie pleaded with her sister to use these gifts so they wouldn't have to resort to desperate measures like their rivals. She accepted the generous gift with a smile and immediately got to work, her hands moving with practiced precision. The protagonist marveled at her mastery, while Alicia noted that as Lucas's mistress, she rarely needed to show off. However, the rice remained a mystery, until Annie rushed in with a book she'd discovered in her father's room. It was a guide on how to prepare rice. Alicia was thrilled, knowing that eating it raw would be both tough and tasteless. Alicia opened the manual, eager to see what secrets it held, and began reading the instructions aloud. The recipe was written in verse, leading Annie to wonder if it was a magic spell, but Alicia explained it was just about heat control. She began the process, carefully adding water and stirring, but after a few moments, disaster struck. To her dismay, the rice was scorched and ruined. Devastated, she realized they had completely run out of stock. Just as hope seemed lost, the protagonist stepped in, announcing he had brought a fresh supply of grain. With a second chance, Alicia immediately put the new batch of rice back on the stove. As the steam rose, she couldn't help but wonder if this attempt would finally be the one. Finally, the cooking was done, and she tentatively lifted the lid of the heavy pot. A heavenly aroma filled the air, and Alicia's delighted cry could be heard all the way down the street. They had finally succeeded. Meanwhile, a massive crowd had gathered outside the neighboring restaurant. William complained of hunger, but his friend urged patience, promising that the beautiful server would be worth the wait. Despite the promise of a pretty face, William's stomach continued to growl with intense impatience. Suddenly, a mouth-watering scent wafted through the air, catching him completely off guard. Alicia appeared before the hungry crowd with a tray of food, inviting them all to come eat at Lucas's place instead. Every man in the queue turned to look at her, absolutely mesmerized by her sudden appearance. William was struck by her incredible beauty as Alicia confidently announced their brand new menu. Just then, Annie emerged wearing a uniform. Surprised, our protagonist questioned her outfit, and she explained she was helping her sister today, choosing a matching look so her sister wouldn't stand out. She conveniently left out the part about their heated argument over the design. Meanwhile, the crowd at the neighboring shop watched in disbelief, wondering if a real restaurant had actually opened across the street. Drawn in by the enticing aroma and the charming waitress, William and his friend approached the girls and asked if they could finally order. With a warm smile, the girl happily agreed. Before long, every single table in the shop was occupied. The protagonist delivered William's order, thanking them for their patience before presenting the day's special. On the menu were meat-stuffed perilla leaf rolls and burdock roots, paired with a creamy potato salad, hearty vegetable soup, and steaming white rice, the establishment's signature set meal. William stared at the tray in pure shock, his eyes locking onto the rice. His friend was equally stunned, wondering how a simple shop could serve such a rare luxury. As they wondered about the taste, our MC felt confident they'd love it, knowing how much heart the girls had put into the preparation. Plus, every ingredient was fresh from his own garden. Upon taking his first bite of the rice, William gasped, "What is this?" The flavor was beyond anything he'd imagined. His friend noted how incredibly soft and fluffy it was, with the flavor only deepening with every chew. It was truly divine. He couldn't help but admit the salad, soup, and meat were equally exceptional. William added that the perilla leaves provided a refreshing, piquant kick to the entire dish. The burdock offered a satisfying crunch, and his excitement reached a fever pitch as he realized a meal couldn't possibly get better than this. With the rice perfectly complementing the savory meat and vegetables, he felt like he could keep eating forever. Having never experienced such a culinary masterpiece, he realized this place was truly extraordinary. A moment later, he let out a disappointed gasp. His bowl was already empty. Seeing this, Annie arrived with a fresh serving. He stared at her in surprise as she offered him a playful smile. Plus, he can eat as much rice as his heart desires. Both boys were absolutely floored by the offer. Meanwhile, the people, standing outside the neighboring restaurant, overheard the commotion. They heard the patrons at Lucas's place loudly demanding second helpings, and the entire crowd decided to head over. The sisters had long since forgotten the last time their establishment saw such a massive rush, as soon every single seat was occupied. New customers kept flooding in, begging for tables. Annie, Alicia, and Gio could barely keep up with the influx of orders. Everyone raved about the food, claiming they'd never tasted anything like it. William asked Gio for another dish. As he complied, he noticed Alicia beaming with joy. Despite the chaos, she looked truly happy. He quickly delivered the fresh order to William and his companion. After one bite, the friend remarked that this dish was just as incredible. He wondered aloud where they sourced such rare, high-quality ingredients. Gio was thrilled they enjoyed the meal so much. He was just about to mention his secret garden, but Annie quickly signaled for him to keep quiet. Gio immediately shut his mouth, and when William asked if something was the matter, Gio smoothly assured him that everything was perfectly fine. Satisfied and full, William admitted he had no idea such a gem existed in this neighborhood. He noted that while the place across the street has pretty girls, the food here is on a whole different level. He vowed to become a regular from now on, and Gio warmly replied that they'd be honored to have him back. He added that the cuisine at Lucas's restaurant is truly top tier, and the owner herself is just as sweet. Alicia couldn't help but laugh joyfully at his compliment. Once the final customer departed, the girls finally closed up shop for the night. Alicia thanked Gio from the bottom of her heart, admitting she couldn't remember the last time they had so many guests. Alicia was stunned, unable to believe the shop had been empty just yesterday. Gio offered to keep providing his top-tier ingredients, and Alicia eagerly accepted, promising a handsome reward. However, our protagonist shook his head and objected, insisting he didn't need a single cent. This left Alicia absolutely floored. She wasn't having it. Friendship aside, as a restaurateur, she couldn't dream of taking such premium produce for free. Flustered by her intensity, Gio finally caved. Seeing an opening, Alicia offered to pay double the market rate for his incredible harvest. Gio kept it humble, reminding her she still had a business to rebuild. He laughed and suggested a different deal. He just wanted to see the shop thrive. They'd stick to the standard market price for now and only raise it once she was back on her feet. Deeply moved by his selflessness, Alicia thanked him before shifting the topic, asking what he truly thought of her older sister. Caught off guard, a confused Gio could only manage to say that Annie was a good girl. Alicia leaned in with a smirk, asking why he didn't just take her out for a stroll then. Gio nearly choked in surprise just as Annie walked in. Alicia greeted her warmly, thanking her for all her hard work. Annie immediately snapped back, telling her to stop teasing Gio since he was too dense to realize it. Gio was a bit indignant at being called an idiot, but he quickly realized she was just playing around. Alicia conceded with a chuckle. She leaned toward Annie and, with a mischievous whisper, warned her that if she didn't make a move soon, she might just steal Gio for herself. Alicia laughed as she walked away, leaving a bewildered Annie behind. Annie had no idea what was just said, but Alicia simply smiled and bid them good night, needing to prepare for the big day ahead. She was determined to do everything in her power to ensure the restaurant's prosperity. Later, Gio turned to Annie, mentioning how relieved he was to see Alicia back to her old self. Annie agreed, noting that the stress of the situation had previously pushed her sister to the absolute brink. Even she was stunned by how rapidly things had improved. Annie watched him closely, before explaining that she had something vital to say regarding his gift. In her opinion, it was best if the public knew as little as possible. When he looked at her, confused, she warned that someone might try to exploit his power. They could kidnap him, lock him away, and force him to produce endless goods like a slave farmer. She wasn't trying to scare him, just to warn him. He realized then why she'd stopped him from telling William earlier. Touched, he asked if she truly cared about him that much. Annie snapped back irritably, claiming she only wanted to protect the restaurant's reputation. Our hero just grinned, fully understanding the subtext. He whispered that during tough times, having someone to rely on is everything. He was truly grateful to have friends like Annie to share his burdens with. Hearing this, she sheepishly asked if he realized he had literally saved her life today. She felt she hadn't done enough in return. He simply smiled, telling her not to worry about it since they'd been friends since childhood. She called him a good-natured idiot in response, causing him to ask what she just said. Turning around with an innocent look, she claimed she had thanked him. He was completely stunned. He even asked if she'd eaten something strange, as such sudden honesty felt suspicious. She laughed, realizing she actually had. She'd eaten that miraculous meat grown from a tree. After saying their goodbyes, the protagonist walked home, marveling at the fact that Annie had actually thanked him so sincerely. It was all thanks to his incredible gift. He felt a deep sense of pride knowing his hard work had brought so much joy to the town, but he knew Annie's warning carried weight. If the wrong people found out about his power, things would turn ugly. He had to stay vigilant. The following morning, Lily was heading home from the market, feeling quite satisfied with her latest haul. As she noticed the bustling crowds filling the streets, she couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. She gasped in surprise, wondering where that massive line was heading. Last time she visited the most popular spot was across the street, but now it sat completely deserted. Reading the sign for Lucas's restaurant, she realized there had to be a secret to his sudden success, and her blood began to boil. Meanwhile, our hero cried out in dismay, "Oh no, not again!" Senna asked what was wrong, and he showed her the damage. Pointing at a ruined tomato plant, he groaned that they'd eaten it again. It was those damn crows. They'd been a constant nuisance lately. Senna gripped her sword, her eyes narrowing as she asked if she should just wipe them out. "Wait, kill them," he replied. "Aren't crows a bit beneath an adventurer's notice?" She just shrugged. "Maybe just a little." Suddenly the crows descended upon the garden, but spotted the girl and her blade. They scattered in terror, much to Senna's confusion. Gio noted it was odd, as they never fled when he was alone. Perhaps they instinctively feared her power? Senna teased that the birds simply didn't take him seriously, earning a playful "shut up." Senna joked about quitting adventuring to become a garden guard, but Gio urged her to head out on her journey. After a final goodbye, she departed. Alone again, Gio knew the birds would return. The fence was useless, and he couldn't stand guard over the crops forever. That's when he remembered the pile of magic stones he had stored away. He realized he could use them to level up. As the system confirmed the consumption, he hoped this would solve his problem. He wondered how to protect his crops from birds when a voice announced his level had reached 10. Now he could expand the garden and unlock new skills. Gio was ecstatic. Finally, new abilities. Just then, a girl named Lily called out, apologizing for the sudden intrusion. Startled by the visitor, Gio decided to check his level-up rewards later. Looking at the stranger, he couldn't quite place her. The girl greeted him warmly, expressing her delight at meeting him before finally introducing herself. Her name was Lily LaRuca, a traveling merchant. Gio was stunned. A merchant? Seeing her petite frame, he wondered if she was a Lilliputian. Lily confirmed his suspicion before asking for his name. After introducing himself, Gio asked why she was there. She explained that Lucas's restaurant had become famous for its incredible food. After tasting it, she was blown away, and Gio couldn't help but smile. She was desperate to know where they got such high-quality ingredients. She apologized, admitting she actually followed the delivery trail which led her straight to his doorstep. Gio was taken aback. Had she been stalking him? But the girl continued her analysis. She noted that his house looked far too ordinary to be the source of such legendary produce. Gio asked what she was really after, feeling increasingly uneasy. He cursed his luck. Who exactly was this girl? Lily narrowed her eyes, studying him intently. She boldly claimed that a special gift must be involved in his farming. Gio froze in shock. Annie's warning immediately flashed through his mind. It was vital that he keep the true nature of his power a secret from everyone. If the wrong person found out, they'd surely try to exploit him. Stuttering, he tried to think of what to say. He tried to deny it, but Lily just laughed. Did he really think he could fool her? He was an open book. Looking at her, he couldn't help but wonder if she was just a simpleton. He was baffled. What kind of person was she anyway? To test the waters, he offered her some fruit from his garden. After one bite of an apple, Lily's eyes lit up as she praised its incredible flavor. She asked if this masterpiece really came from his garden, and when he confirmed it, she let out a gasp of pure awe. Lily cut to the chase, proposing a partnership to expand his reach beyond just the Lucas restaurant to shops and cafes everywhere. She laughed, sensing his hesitation, and assured him that hobbits live by a code of absolute honesty in every trade. He realized she was right. Hobbits were renowned for being an exceptionally intelligent, peaceful, and trustworthy people. To put him at ease, Lily suggested a magical contract to protect their trade secrets and ensure both parties played by the rules. She urged him to finalize the deal so they could dive into the details, and the protagonist realized she had a point. Since the restaurant's customers already loved his produce, why not share these high-quality goods with the rest of the world? Though he wasn't a businessman, he knew that partnering with an experienced merchant like her would be a massive advantage. Despite his lingering doubts, the security of a magical contract was too good an offer to pass up. Making his decision, he agreed to the terms, earning a warm smile and a word of thanks from Lily. She produced the document, and the protagonist didn't hesitate as he began to sign his name. Suddenly, a soft but brilliant aura erupted around him, signaling the magic taking hold. With the contract officially in effect, Lily was ready to talk business. But our hero had one condition first. He agreed to discuss the specifics, but only after showing her where the magic actually happens. He led her toward his small vegetable garden, leaving the girl tilting her head in confusion. However, once they arrived, her jaw dropped. Meat grew on trees, and every imaginable vegetable and mushroom flourished without a single seed. He explained that everything matures in just an hour, allowing him to harvest any species or variety instantly. After demonstrating the garden's impossible speed, he casually finished with, "So yeah, that's basically how it works." Lily couldn't believe her eyes as Magnus explained he could manipulate the flavor to be perfectly refreshing. He could even add sweetness, adjusting the profile to whatever was needed for the perfect dish. Stunned, Lily whispered in awe, unable to comprehend such an incredible and rare gift. When Magnus asked if she had said something, she quickly brushed it off, claiming she was just in shock. She noted that such quality was impossible to find elsewhere, leaving Magnus puzzled by her intense reaction. Honestly, he was starting to suspect something was off. Meanwhile, Lily continued to praise the first-class quality of his harvest. Magnus thought he was imagining things, but the suspicion continued to gnaw at him. He insisted that regardless of anyone's opinion, his cultivation technology was truly revolutionary. He'd even developed new products recently, piquing Lily's curiosity about what they could be. He revealed he'd started growing fish, and her amazement reached a whole new level. Fish? As if meat growing on trees wasn't enough. Magnus clarified that these didn't grow on branches, though. Instead, they grew like mushrooms in garden beds, nearly causing a stunned Lily to faint on the spot. After inspecting it closely, it was clearly natural, high-quality fish, though Magnus admitted he had no idea how to cook it. He wasn't sure if he should dry it or smoke it, prompting Lily to suggest a celebratory dinner. To commemorate their new partnership, they decided to head to the kitchen and prepare the fish together. As they began cooking, Lily confessed that her past experience doing business with seasoned fishermen had taught her quite a few culinary secrets. For instance, she identified the fish she was currently cleaning as a mackerel. After expertly slicing it, she admired the fresh fillet before turning her attention back to Magnus. Lily suggested he slice it into 3 sections, noting how wonderful it was to work with such high-quality fresh fish. When Gio asked if they could eat it raw, she admitted she'd never heard of such a thing but was open to experimenting. Gio took over the knife for the next fish, following Lily's pointers, though he quickly realized how intricate the process was. As he finished, she noted they'd need salt, oil, and a few vegetables. Gio was amazed by her extensive culinary expertise. She explained that her job allowed her to travel to fascinating cities and meet all kinds of interesting people. Gio was inspired, admitting he'd love to travel one day or even pursue the life of an adventurer. Lily teased him, wondering how his ability to grow meat on trees would help in the wild, and they shared a laugh. Finally, she lifted the lid of the pot and proudly announced that the meal was officially ready to serve. As she plated the food, Gio was stunned by the presentation, noting that every single dish looked absolutely exquisite. He was dying to dig in when Lily placed a plate before him, introducing it as fried fish à la meunière. Gio took his first bite and was immediately floored by how incredibly tender and succulent the meat was. It was a far cry from the tough, dried rations he was usually forced to gnaw on. Every bite was a revelation, soft, deeply flavored, and impossibly juicy. He eagerly asked Lily for her own opinion. To his shock, she blurted out a passionate exclamation, declaring that the taste was almost too good to be true. Gio jumped back in surprise, having never expected such an intense, visceral reaction from her. She continued her praise, describing the rich fat and subtle sweetness, noting how the vegetable soup perfectly complemented the flavor profile. After sampling every dish, she sat back, completely satisfied. Resting her cheek on her hand, she confessed it was the most superb fish she'd ever eaten. It was simply mind-blowing. Startled by her sudden change in demeanor, Gio tentatively asked if she was feeling all right. She looked at him in bewilderment before laughing, embarrassed that she had actually voiced those thoughts out loud. Gio confirmed it was true, but teased her that she should probably keep her voice down next time. Lily offered a sincere apology for being so informal, admitting she had completely lost herself in the moment. Her face flushed a deep crimson as she expressed just how embarrassed she felt. Gio reassured her that it was no big deal. The dish was a massive success, and the vendor wholeheartedly agreed. It was a culinary masterpiece. Gio insisted it was all thanks to her, but Lily humbly argued otherwise until she finally burst into laughter. She suggested they consider it a mutual effort, noting that such compromises are the foundation of a fruitful partnership. She then told him he could finally start calling her by her first name. Gio agreed, but his mind was already racing. He was now determined to raise even more of this specific fish. But there was a significant problem. Increasing the fish population meant he'd have to scale back his other crops. If only he had a much larger garden, but his current plot was simply too cramped to expand any further. Lily thoughtfully pointed out that it was impossible to expand beyond the physical boundaries of the land. Suddenly, a light bulb went off. Since his crops grew so fast, he could just implement a rotation system. But at that exact moment, the crows returned. Gio growled in frustration. Here they go again. It was obvious the feathered thieves were setting their sights on his prize-winning fish. Without a second thought, he snatched up his trusty shovel. He charged toward the birds, shouting that they were absolutely no match for him. He swung with all his might to drive them off, but the agile crows were quick to scatter. He continued brandishing the shovel like a madman, screaming at the pests to stay away. Watching the chaotic display, Lily struggled to hold back her laughter at the ridiculous sight. However, when Gio turned around, he realized the distraction had worked. The crows had made off with his fish anyway. The birds had scavenged what they could, leaving the vendor to ask in shock if he was all right. Gio sighed, glad he'd at least salvaged something, though these flocks were becoming a real menace. He wasn't about to let them feast for free, though Lily suggested fish farming might not be his calling. Gio felt the sting of her words. But then he remembered the new skill he'd unlocked that morning. There it was. Create Protector. Suddenly, a mechanical voice echoed in his mind, asking if he wished to summon a guardian right then and there. Without hesitation, Gio shouted, "Yes!" A confused Lily muttered to herself, wondering who on earth he was talking to. But her confusion turned to awe as a massive golem began to emerge, directly from the earth, stunning not only the young girl, but catching even Gio off guard. In the blink of an eye, the summon was complete as a towering monolithic golem stood tall before them. Curiously, a fishtail protruded from its head, prompting a bewildered Gio to ask, "Are you really the one who's going to protect my garden?" The golem slammed its metallic chest in affirmation, letting out a heavy, resonant ring. "Excellent!" Gio cheered, pointing toward the sky. "Now go and scatter those crows!" Still in shock, Lily demanded an explanation, to which Gio simply replied it was another part of his gift. She could only stare at him, her mind racing with disbelief at his growing power. Together, they watched to see exactly how this golem would handle the intruders. The massive protector charged at the flock, swinging its heavy limbs to drive the pests away. His heavy fists scattered them, but the crows quickly retaliated, pouncing on him from all sides. Lily watched in shock, exclaiming that the birds were actually trying to fight back against the golem. Our protagonist could only watch in awe of the golem's power. Despite the onslaught, he didn't have a single scratch. Even the birds seemed bewildered by their opponent's durability as the guardian began swinging his massive fists once more. He eventually drove off every last one of the pests, prompting the protagonist to cheer, "That's what you get for messing with us." Lily was left speechless, staring at the sheer destructive force behind the golem's heavy blows. She couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if such a terrifying power was ever used for evil? Ignoring her concerns, the protagonist patted the golem's sturdy frame and with a wide smile praised his hard work, relieved that everything had finally turned out for the best. He then turned to the stunned girl and reassured her that there was nothing more to fear. "Don't worry," he told her. "The harvest is officially safe under his watch." Lily simply nodded, her mind still racing as she processed the incredible display she'd just witnessed. After saying her goodbyes, she headed off to finalize their upcoming business arrangement. The protagonist figured she was heading back to prepare the deal, keeping her promise that they'd meet again soon. With the garden now under the golem's protection, the following days passed in absolute tranquility. A few days later, the merchant returned to express her gratitude, but he was more interested in if the paperwork was ready. Lily confirmed it was, adding that she'd actually purchased the empty house and the plot of land right next to his. She then laughed and revealed she was handing the entire plot over to him, leaving Gio wondering if he'd misheard her. He couldn't believe she was just giving him vacant land like that. This was a massive investment. She explained that she wanted his harvest to be as large as possible, but Gio was still worried about the massive sum she'd spent. She insisted he shouldn't worry, as she was handing it over for free, leaving Gio absolutely stunned by her generosity. "Normal?" Lily replied with a smirk. She viewed it as a business investment, certain that this plot would soon generate staggering profits. She laughed, noting that a gift like this would surely solidify the trust between them. Surprised by the mention of trust, Gio smiled and thanked her for the extravagant gift, shaking her hand to seal their partnership. He vowed to expand the business further, and as they shook hands, he felt certain that Lily was someone he could truly rely on. Lily quickly got back to work, stating that their first order of business was to demolish the abandoned house on the site. Gio told her it would be easy, though Lily had no idea what he meant until the system announced the new plot was open. He authorized the land conversion and the new fence, while Lily stood by, completely baffled by the invisible process. Suddenly the house vanished. Seeing the massive, ready-to-plant field, Gio marveled at just how much they could produce here. Lily examined the perfectly cleared land and the new perimeter, muttering that this was the most impressive magic she'd ever seen. Gio leaned against his golem, smiling at his partner as she handed him a massive payment, one he decided to keep hidden from Senna for now. When Senna arrived, she was floored by the garden's new size, wondering how on earth they had transformed it so quickly. Gio explained he'd secured the land to increase their yield, and Senna's eyes lit up at the thought of all the new crops. She envisioned an endless supply of meat trees, but then her eyes caught something she didn't recognize. "What's this one?" she asked, and Gio explained it was a fish crop, promising her it was a delicacy. Senna excitedly jumped onto a golem, noting they had more of them now, though Gio admitted these new ones were a bit stubborn. She wished these gardens could exist everywhere, but Gio clarified that his abilities were limited to his specific territory. Opening his system window, he began browsing for their next harvest to see what else he could unlock. He realized he could now grow high-tier medicinal herbs, including rare elixir plants, which caught him off guard. When he asked if she knew of them, Senna explained that those were the legendary ingredients used to create top-tier healing potions. It's normally available at any pharmacy, but a severe shortage has recently hit the market. Potion makers are currently forced to wait for the next harvest of this specific herb. Shifa is also struggling due to this, making it impossible for her to clear the dungeon. She offered a faint smile and suggested resting, but Gio couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Exploring dungeons without potions is a death wish, and Shifa would be thrilled if he could find some. A short while later, Gio was hauling a heavy bag, having successfully harvested the rare herb. Now, he just needed to find the specific pharmacy Senna had mentioned. He eventually approached a dilapidated building, feeling a sense of dread as he looked at the ruins. It looked completely deserted, making him wonder what kind of person would run a shop here. Steeling his resolve, he stepped inside to see what kind of eccentric owner he was dealing with. He crept forward cautiously, immediately struck by the heavy, gloomy atmosphere of the interior. Rows of strange flasks lined the dusty shelves, adding to the unsettling vibe of the room. Despite the eerie silence, the protagonist soon spotted a mysterious silhouette in the back. He approached the figure, intending to explain his delivery, but stopped dead in his tracks. He asked the man, Dennis, if this was his shop, only for him to sheepishly admit he was just an assistant. However, our hero couldn't help but wonder why on earth this man was dressed in a full maid outfit. Dennis awkwardly asked if it looked weird, while Gio noted that the outfit was certainly unique. To put it bluntly, the frilly uniform didn't exactly match the dark and dreary surroundings. Suddenly, Marin emerged from the shadows, claiming that the outfit was actually a special uniform. Dennis cried out her name in shock, completely caught off guard by her sudden appearance. Marin greeted the MC, noting she'd never seen him around before. Gio stood there perplexed, feeling as though he'd just seen a ghost. While the abandoned house suited her perfectly, Denise looked absolutely petrified. He petulantly offered to make a new uniform, but Marin refused on the manager's orders. Our hero noted the shop's unsightly location, realizing the cute uniform was meant to attract customers. He told Denise not to be shy, insisting the outfit actually looked great on him. Denise snapped back in frustration, claiming he hated the frilly uniform simply because he was a boy. Marin shouted back that he wasn't just a boy, he was a total cutie. Completely baffled, Denise could only ask one thing. What was the point of this? He was clearly just an ordinary boy, but Marin completely disagreed with his assessment. With his big eyes and soft cheeks, she argued the apron suited him perfectly. She wasn't making it up. The kid was just born naturally adorable. The protagonist watched the chaos in confusion and prepared to take his leave. But Denise suddenly called out to stop him. He realized the hero was actually there on business. The hero nodded, explaining he had gathered ingredients for a health potion and wanted to see if they were interested in buying. Denise and Marin both stared at the offering in pure shock. Gio presented the herbs and asked if they were the real deal. He questioned if they'd be useful, and Dennis nodded in absolute agreement. Confirming they were top-tier quality, Marin reached out to inspect the sprouts. Feeling the texture with her fingertips, she couldn't believe her eyes. These plants were incredibly vibrant and potent, perfect for brewing a first-class health potion. Gio was shocked, but Dennis explained that potion value is strictly determined by their grade and effectiveness. Thanks to her unique gift, Marin could evaluate a potion's quality at a single glance. Dennis stared at the aim leaves in pure admiration, exclaiming in total awe. He had never seen such massive leaves and desperately wondered where Gio had harvested them. Gio awkwardly kept his source a secret, while Dennis noted how rare this was given the year's poor harvest. The protagonist simply smiled, playing it off as if it were nothing special. Suddenly, Marin's gaze turned cold as she wondered why Dennis was being so friendly with him. Jealous of the constant praise, she snapped back to reality only when Gio called her name. He mentioned a favor regarding his sister, Senna, an adventurer Dennis knew well from her visits to Shifa. Gio offered a steep discount on the herbs if they promised to sell the finished potions specifically to him. Marin quickly agreed to the deal, securing the high-quality ingredients for the shop. While the Shifa squad were already regular customers, Marin still had one final condition. Gio braced himself, thinking she wanted more herbs, but her demand was far more eccentric. She fiercely declared that Dennis belonged only to her and that she was his one true love. As Gio left the pharmacy, he reflected on how intense Marin was. But at least the deal was sealed. Once the potions are back on sale, Shifa will surely thank him, causing him to flash a sly smirk. He remained lost in thought while, over at the pharmacy, Dennis was busy at work. Dennis lamented that he should have asked the boy to bring even more of those raw materials. Marin noted that the ingredients were of exceptional quality, but she was hesitant. She refused to trade them for anything less, leaving Dennis looking on in utter confusion. She wondered to herself if that mysterious girl was involved again. This truly was an alchemical ingredient of unparalleled quality. Where did he even get this? Marin wondered as she began pouring the liquid into a flask. But as the potion settled into the container, she suddenly noticed something startling. Dennis eagerly asked, "Well, Marin, is it first class or what?" Marin exclaimed that the quality of the potion was actually beyond anything she had ever seen. It was far too potent to sell as is. It would need to be heavily diluted first. Meanwhile, Senna found Gio and told him that Shifa had purchased a massive stock of potions thanks to his herbs. Shifa was thrilled and sent her thanks, prompting Gio to jokingly ask if a date was off the table. Senna laughed it off, noting that she was already heading out on another long raid. Gio worried she might cause Shifa more trouble, but Senna snapped back, calling it slander and praising her skills. She insisted the girl was an indispensable warrior. Sometime later, the party arrived at the dungeon. Annie warned the team about a monster lurking ahead and immediately rushed forward to attack. Shifa told them to hold on for just a moment longer as she gathered her strength. Her hands began to glow with magical energy as she prepared to provide cover. With a decisive strike, Senna swung her blade, effortlessly cleaving the massive monster in two. Annie praised her for taking down the formidable blood grizzly so easily. Senna smiled, modestly claiming it was because they had her back. But Annie insisted it was pure skill. Nifa agreed, noting she barely had to intervene this time. Between her natural talent and the favor of the sword god, she was a fast learner. Nifa added that their smooth progress was also thanks to Gio's vital health potions. Senna recalled how flustered Gio became when she thanked him earlier. Suddenly, Annie halted the group, blocking their path. She sensed someone up ahead, though the presence was incredibly faint. It sounded like someone was badly wounded, and as they rushed forward, they discovered two slumped bodies. Nifa cried out that they needed to provide medical aid immediately. As they checked the victims, Senna reached into her pocket to retrieve a recovery potion, but a monstrous shadow suddenly lunged from the darkness. Annie shouted a desperate warning to her friend. Senna reacted instantly, narrowly leaping out of harm's way. Were these people friends or a trap? These new arrivals were allies of the beast they'd just slain. Shifa apologized for the trouble and asked Senna to create a diversion for a few moments. She pointed out that these wounds were clearly inflicted by monsters. Senna reassured them, telling them to focus on the wounded while she held the line. She weighed her options. While taking down one enemy was easy, facing off against three while protecting the girls was going to be a struggle. Suddenly, Annie cried out in alarm. "It looks like a massive wave is approaching." A horde of monsters was descending upon them. Senna gasped in disbelief. Wait, even more? But then, a group of seasoned warriors charged out from the dungeon and joined the fray. They immediately began tearing through the monster ranks. Shifa saw her opening and, invoking her Empress Prestige skill, she bolstered Senna's speed and agility for combat. Drawing her blade, Senna vowed to end this once and for all. Anna parried the monster's strike and launched herself off the wall, driving her blade deep into the beast's skull. Upon landing, she urged the others to move. Just as they prepared to rush forward, Senna turned to find Elizabeth standing behind her. She was stunned to realize it was Shifa's squad coming to their aid. Shocked, she realized they had just been saved. Elizabeth immediately checked for casualties. Annie agreed. They needed medicine fast. They began desperately treating the injuries, but Elizabeth noted the wounds were so severe they'd need an entire barrel of supplies. She ordered her team to gather every potion they had, though a boy noted a high-grade one would suffice. As Annie applied the liquid to the girl's body, a brilliant magical aura erupted from the wound, instantly beginning the regeneration process. The onlookers watched in total awe as the shredded flesh knit itself back together. The girls regained consciousness and stared at their bodies in disbelief, searching for any trace of the lethal injuries that had vanished. Grateful, they thanked Shifa's squad for the rescue. Elizabeth offered to let them tag along, assuming they were separated from their original group. Shifa agreed to scout the area while Elizabeth marveled at the medicine's potency. This wasn't just a standard high-grade potion. The quality was nothing short of legendary. When asked where they found it, Shifa hesitantly mentioned the local shop, the apothecary run by Mrs. Marine. Elizabeth noted the name, impressed by the woman's skill. It was a name she would certainly remember as they moved out. Senna couldn't help but comment on how beautiful she was. Shifa mentioned her old pact with Elizabeth, leading Annie to note that such reliability is expected of a B-rank warrior. She's dependable, yet she constantly cycles through her squad members despite them being top-tier professionals. Something Annie found quite strange. Senna agreed, but noted that the potion they were using was even more bizarre. In practice, it healed even the most lethal wounds, boasting a quality far superior to any standard first-class medicine. Annie examined the liquid, questioning how they could have possibly brewed something of this caliber. "It's all because of him," Senna claimed, putting the spotlight squarely on the protagonist. Meanwhile, as the MC approached the local pharmacy, he saw Dennis seeing off a group of incredibly satisfied customers. The crowd was thrilled with the effects of the new potion, and it was all thanks to Gio's high-quality herbs. He smiled, having already heard the glowing reviews from Senna. He felt a sense of pride knowing his work could heal life-threatening wounds and be of genuine use to Shifa. Dennis noticed the fresh delivery and asked in shock how he had gathered so many herbs so quickly. As they spoke, Marin peeked around the corner to give the protagonist a shy greeting. Gio wondered if she was spying on him again, but Dennis quickly called out to her, announcing that the MC had brought in another massive haul of supplies. Marin happily gathered the herbs, offering the protagonist her sincere thanks. It was truly thanks to his harvest that the shop was now overflowing with business. Even with the potion being heavily diluted, the demand was so high they could barely keep up with the rush. Gio modestly noted that while he could grow the plants, the actual brewing process was beyond his expertise. Dina told Miron just how impressed she was. She was amazed by his skill and joyfully grabbed the protagonist's hands in excitement. She insisted that their success was all thanks to him. Perplexed by the praise, the protagonist simply promised to bring them even more medicinal herbs. Meanwhile, Senna dumped a pile of magic stones onto the ground and cheered. "Look at how many magic stones we've gathered." Our MC realized that thanks to his health potions, their efficiency had skyrocketed. Eager to see what else he could achieve, he checked his progress as the system notified him of a level up. New fences, skills, and products were now available. Gio couldn't believe his eyes, exclaiming, "Is that a new skill? Can I actually grow eggs?" The protagonist was beyond curious about this bizarre development. Suddenly, a massive egg began to emerge from a sprout, fully maturing right before his eyes. Staring at the specimen, the protagonist shouted, "What an incredible egg!" He expected something small, but in reality it was gargantuan. He couldn't help but wonder, what kind of monster would hatch from this? He'd befriended a golem, but raising a monster was a whole new challenge. What would he even do with it? He hoped he'd figure it out as he plucked the egg from its brand new sprout. Tending to one branch is simple enough, but managing the rest is the real challenge. Suddenly, Lily approaches. He quickly hides the egg in the bushes before she spots it. Lily mentions she's heard rumors about his incredible new potions. She's stunned to realize he's the creator, noting that his medicinal herbs are of exceptional quality. His entire field is filled with valuable flora, proving he's thriving on his own. He calmly agrees, planning to expand his harvest soon. When he asks about magical creatures, Lily explains that she handles those as well, as the demand is quite high. While most are used for raw materials, the protagonist asks about the market for monster eggs. Lily is visibly surprised, admitting she's never actually seen a monster egg listed for sale. Capturing a living monster is nearly impossible, as they are naturally savage and unpredictable. They are fundamentally violent and incompatible with humans. The very idea of domesticating one is unheard of. After Lily departs, the MC stares at the egg, doubting he could ever find a buyer for it. He looks at the shell and wonders if the creature inside is truly as dangerous and incompatible with humanity as the legends claim. He figures he can handle it while it's small, but he remains cautious. He even considers whether it would be safer to just prevent it from hatching at all. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound echoes from the shell, catching him completely off guard. The egg is finally moving. Meanwhile, the scene shifts as the day comes to a close. As night falls, Gio is found sitting quietly on his porch. He notices Senna is running late again today, even as the final rays of the sun disappear. Despite the wait, he feels a strange sense of warmth. Later, Senna finally returns to enjoy a meal. She thanks him for the food, her appetite as massive as ever after another grueling day of monster hunting. The protagonist looked away, lost in thought. Sensing his distraction, Senna asked what he was doing. Gio replied that he was prepping for tomorrow's harvest, then asked if monsters were truly as violent as they say. Senna confirmed it, reminding him that the girls they saved would have been disemboweled if not for his potion. Gio fell silent. It seemed that humans and monsters were truly incompatible. Suddenly, Senna approached the golem and hugged it, asking if there were other kind monsters like this one. She wondered if he could befriend others, noting that since she's always away, a golem is his only family. Gio smiled, remarking that he manages just fine without her, but she quickly cut him off. She teased that he's just lazy. Since their parents died young, she's been his only family, but now she's constantly wandering. Shifting his focus, he picked up the egg and checked on its progress. Without warning, the egg began to twitch and vibrate once more. In that moment, he resolved to raise the creature himself and give it the best care possible. Opening his system window, he realized he needed to cultivate the right food for it in advance. He wondered what kind of beast would emerge and what he should name it once his work was done. Calling it a day, he headed over to give the egg one last inspection. The movements inside were becoming more frequent and intense. It was clear that it would hatch at any moment, so he carefully picked it up. But as he held it, the shell suddenly turned ice cold in his hands. Panic set in as he wondered what was happening to the life growing inside. The creature was freezing, and he knew he had to warm it up immediately. Seconds later, he began wrapping the egg in thick cloth to trap the heat. He wrapped the egg in a blanket, noting it finally felt a bit warmer. Still, He remained restless. Since he was staying in for the night, he decided to sleep with the egg tucked in right beside him. He climbed into bed and, after carefully positioning the egg, he slowly drifted off to sleep, praying it would hatch soon. Hours later, a sharp cracking sound jolted him awake. He stared at the shell in shock as it began to splinter. It was finally happening. But was he truly prepared for what was inside? As he began to cheer the little creature on, a tiny kitten finally emerged from the shell. He was skeptical. Is this really a monster? It looked so weak and fragile. Realizing it needed food, he headed toward a unique, fruit-bearing tree, thinking to himself that the little one urgently required some milk to survive. The tree was laden with milk-filled pods. He picked one, cracked it open, and poured the contents into a bowl, as Gio noted how delicious it smelled. Finally, he placed the fresh milk in front of the kitten. He offered it to the kitten, wondering if he'd actually drink it. The little guy licked the contents, clearly enjoying it as he happily lapped it up. It worked! He's really drinking it! Gio cheered. Fortunately, the garden provides everything they could possibly need right here. With plenty of food available, the kitten already looked more spirited. Gio warned him not to rush, lest he end up with a painful stomach ache. He then reached out toward the creature, who immediately began to nuzzle affectionately against his hand. He couldn't help but smile, marveling at how cute and fluffy the kitten was. Though technically a monster, he figured the little guy could easily pass as a house pet. Now, what should he name him? As he watched the kitten play, inspiration finally struck his mind. He decided right then and there to call him Milky. It was a fitting name, given his love for the drink. A few hours later, Senna returned home and stopped in her tracks, completely blindsided by the new addition. "What on earth is that thing?" she demanded. Gio casually explained that the kitten would be living with them from now on. Senna asked if he'd just found a stray, and Gio simply nodded, deciding to keep the monster egg origin a secret. She reached out to pet the newcomer, but Milky snapped and bit her hand. Fuming, Senna rubbed her finger and asked if the cat was always this aggressive. Gio shot back, questioning why she'd immediately reach out to grab a strange animal. He told her she'd just scared the poor thing, leaving Senna pouting. It was clear he was far more concerned for the kitten's well-being than for hers. Senna began bickering with Milky, insisting that Gio was her brother, not the creature's. Gio served Senna dinner and gave Milky some milk, leaving Senna completely perplexed. She asked if he actually grew milk in his garden, wanting some for herself. After finishing her dinner, she eagerly downed a fresh glass of milk. She joyfully exclaimed how sweet and delicious it was. Gio smiled, thinking about how wonderful it was to harvest such high-quality delicacies from his own backyard. They finally felt like a real family, giving him even more motivation to expand his harvest. The next day, Gio visited the pharmacy with more than just his usual delivery. Marin and Dennis were stunned by the variety of rare herbs he brought along. When he asked if they were useful, Marin eagerly confirmed they were. She was shocked to find the legendary Hiyari herb among his collection. She had never seen one in person and explained it could be used to brew ice potions. These potions granted immunity to extreme heat, while Dennis noted their versatile effects. Gio realized such a potion would be invaluable to adventurers, and Marin agreed, especially when exploring the most treacherous depths of the underworld, such as a volcanic crater. Meanwhile, Senna's party was currently trekking through a grueling dungeon. As the heat intensified, Shifa noted they were approaching a massive volcano. Senna was shocked, as Enya explained the dungeon's levels varied wildly in difficulty. Shifa explained that since they'd cleared the caves, the volcanic zone was next. Beyond that lay forest, ruin, and underwater biomes. There are 5 stages in total, each with unique hazards and beasts, though the underwater depths remain undefeated. It's considered the peak of difficulty, alongside the volcano, whose sweltering heat has prevented all but a few from claiming victory. Senna asked how to clear the stage, and Annie explained that they simply needed to eliminate every boss lurking within the lava. Success meant total victory, but more importantly, it meant massive rewards and rare loot that could be sold for a fortune. Surprised, Senna questioned if they were truly ready to face the volcanic bosses. Could they actually pull this off? Annie admitted the oppressive heat had been their undoing in the past, especially since they lacked any form of water magic. Senna suggested they call it a day, but Shifa suddenly interjected, reaching into her bag and pulling out a mysterious potion that shimmered with a strange, chilling light. She claimed she'd never seen a color like this before. It looked like liquid, crystalline ice. This was an ice potion, an experimental trial batch brewed by Marin herself. "Drink this, and neither heat nor flame will touch you," Shifa promised. Senna was still skeptical, but Shifa stood her ground. She offered the potion for free on one condition: They had to be her test subjects. Annie was amazed, wondering how she'd brewed it. Shifa revealed she had used a rare herb called hyari, purchased from Geo. Senna, however, was still feeling pouty and asked why they had to be the ones to do it. Ignoring her, Shifa insisted that everyone drink the concoction immediately. As the liquid went down, a sudden, intense chill began to radiate from deep within their bodies. Senna let out a sneeze, complaining that they were just dying of heat a moment ago. Shifa urged them to move toward the volcano now. Minutes later, the party arrived at the entrance of the volcanic level, where the air shimmered with intensity. Shifa surveyed the landscape, where a massive, active peak loomed over the horizon. Beneath their feet, the very ground was glowing and scorching hot to the touch. "Look, there's lava!" Annie exclaimed, pointing at the molten flow. Senna noted with a smile that, strangely enough, the air felt pleasantly cool. The temperature was perfect. Clearly, the protagonist and Marin's plan was working. Annie approached the magma, refusing to risk a swim, but as Senna reached out to touch it, Shifa barked a warning just as fiery monsters suddenly manifested around them. The group immediately braced for combat, sensing that these foes were far more powerful than anyone they had faced before. With a swift swing of her blade, Senna effortlessly cut through the molten monsters, mockingly asking if that was all they had to offer. Shifa noticed with a start that her strike had significantly dampened the creature's flames, as if they had been struck by an intense magical chill. It was the potion's effect. It lasted longer than expected, and Shifa realized that Marin and the MC had a gold mine on their hands with such high demand. Senna suggested they press on, and Shifa agreed, confident they could now crush the boss. Meanwhile, the protagonist cheered, celebrating another bountiful harvest of hyari grass. He was willing to do whatever it took to ensure Shifa's success. Opening his system window, he realized there was still one specific feature he had yet to experiment with. It looked like an upgraded fortification, and the system prompted him to build a wall. Without a second thought, the protagonist agreed to the construction. Suddenly, massive stone walls began erupting from the earth. They completely enclosed the plot, leaving Geo baffled. Why would a fortress wall appear around a simple garden? Deciding it was overkill, Geo immediately canceled the construction, realizing he had no need for such a barrier. Shifting his focus, he moved on to examine the next skill in his list. The system offered to hide the entire area from view. Geo agreed, but after activating it, he looked around, only to find that absolutely nothing seemed to have changed. Usually, these magical effects manifested themselves the very moment they were triggered. He decided to check his crops instead, but at first, it didn't look like any new varieties had been added. However, his eyes widened when he noticed the sudden surge in quality. His produce had reached a superior grade, leaving our protagonist absolutely stunned. They had evolved from average to high grade. If the originals were delicious, these would be divine. Just then, an exhausted Senna emerged, complaining about the dungeon and dreaming of a soft bed. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the plot in confusion as Geo greeted her. Startled, she demanded to know where these structures had suddenly come from. A perplexed Geo led her inside, explaining that he was merely testing out some of his new abilities. He realized the neighbors were likely just as shocked by the sudden transformation as she was. To avoid causing a scene, he decided he wouldn't use that particular skill anymore. He quickly pulled up his system window and deactivated the hidden plot. Senna let out a massive sigh of relief, her heart finally stopping its frantic racing. She was so drained that she genuinely feared she'd be forced to sleep outdoors tonight. Noticing she could barely move, Senna barked that this was all his fault. Had he given Marin more herbs, forcing them to spend the entire day climbing the mountain? Our hero was surprised that while they were busy clearing levels, he was just gathering herbs. Since he wasn't there to see them off, they decided to celebrate clearing the first floor with dinner. Senna was ecstatic, but the MC told her to calm down and invite the rest of the girls. He promised to handle all the cooking, a reward that Senna found incredibly motivating. As the days passed, Marin continued to brew new and powerful potions. With her support, the squad managed to push through the dungeon at record speed. They successfully conquered floor after floor of the treacherous labyrinth. Upon entering the final chamber, Annie suddenly came to a halt. "He's here," she whispered, signaling the arrival of the boss, the red lizard. This massive beast was better known to the locals as the volcano. Senna stared in awe, shocked by the sheer scale of the monster. Its massive frame and reinforced hide made it look absolutely invincible. With scales that thick, it was clear why no one had been able to defeat it in years. This was the strongest opponent they had ever faced, forcing them to rethink their strategy. But they wouldn't back down. Senna charged into the center, striking from every possible angle. They fought as one, downing more potions to ensure their mana didn't run dry. After gulping down another brew, Senna declared that they were finishing this here and now. They would slay the lizard and finally enjoy the delicious feast he had promised. They drew their blades as Shifa finally gave the signal. The battle had begun. Her aura as Empress bolstered her allies, while simultaneously weakening their enemies. Senna cried out in pure shock. The beast let out a deafening roar. Shifa noticed it was distracted by Senna, gathering its strength while keeping a close eye on her. Closing the distance would be difficult, but Annie remained hidden behind a rock, waiting for the perfect moment. The monster was no match for her superior hunting instincts. A sudden magical blast erupted toward the creature, and in that instant, Annie lunged forward, with her blade flashing through the air. She struck true, carving a deep wound into its hide. Victory was within reach. She had actually managed to hurt it. The potion she used was proving to be incredibly potent. Senna cheered, shouting that they had caught it off guard. Shifa praised their teamwork, noting how formidable they were together. Annie humbly replied that she couldn't have done it alone. With a shared look of determination, Annie and Senna prepared their final strike to bring the monster down once and for all. Meanwhile, back at the Adventurers Guild, Canaria greeted Shifa and asked for an update on her progress. She noticed a new face and asked if a new warrior had joined the party. Shifa confirmed it was her old friend, Senna. Canaria noted that while Senna clearly gives it her all, dungeons have been becoming increasingly treacherous lately. To Canaria, the girl didn't look particularly powerful, likely just a novice still finding her footing. Oblivious to the scrutiny, Senna happily wondered what they'd be having for dinner. Canaria then asked about their plans and if they had a report. Shifa confirmed they were here to log today's mission, placing a massive monster scale onto the table. Annie identified it immediately as a scale from the volcanic region. This was their official report. They had successfully slain the boss of the volcano. Canaria let out a shocked cry that drew the attention of all the other adventurers in the room, her voice trembling with disbelief. Stunned, she asked if this was actually true, while Annie and Senna covered their ears from the volume of her shout. Shifa offered the scales as proof, and Canaria noted that these definitely belonged to a red lizard, and a massive one at that. She asked if they had teamed up with another squad, but Senna proudly declared they did it, entirely on their own. However, the boss's carcass was still there and needed to be retrieved. Canaria awkwardly explained they'd need scavengers, but their heat-resistant gear wasn't ready. Annie interrupted, saying that wouldn't be necessary. She held out an ice potion, explaining that with one sip, even a volcanic crater would feel perfectly cool. They actually defeated the volcano boss? These girls are so green they hadn't even heard of a fire resistance potion. Potion! Suddenly, she began shouting for the guildmaster at the top of her lungs. After drinking the concoction and entering the dungeon, the adventurers were shocked to find the heat didn't affect them at all. They thanked the girls for their help, promising not to let them down, as Senna pointed out where the lizard lay. They needed to move fast, though the adventurers still had their doubts about whether these rookies could truly handle it. Shifa was only 18 and already a B-rank warrior, but taking down a massive volcano dragon seemed impossible. Annie gestured toward the fallen beast, which sat just up ahead. The veteran adventurers stared at the massive carcass of the volcano dragon in utter shock, unable to believe their eyes. One man marveled at its size, noting that since the body was almost undamaged, the scales would fetch a fortune. Senna beamed, asking if it was really worth that much. The man wondered how they'd managed to take it down so cleanly. The thick scales were pierced by a single, decisive strike. Who could have delivered such a devastating blow? It had to be Shifa or Annie, but Annie admitted she couldn't use a sword like that. The man laughed, doubting the youngest. Senna just smiled, knowing they shouldn't underestimate her, because despite her age, she was a literal master with the blade. Hours later, Senna emptied a bag of magic stones, and Gio's eyes nearly popped out at the haul. Since the reward scaled with the monster's level, the entire guild stood there in awe of the massive payout. Amidst the excitement, little Milky started meowing for attention. As the protagonist began petting the creature, he remarked that it felt like therapy, instantly soothing his soul. Senna pouted, asking why he wouldn't pet his beautiful sister instead, but he just told her not to be jealous of a kitten. She gazed at him in shock, questioning how he'd managed to grow so much in only a few days. Realizing his growth was far too rapid for a normal cat, Gio awkwardly looked away. He suddenly remembered his priorities and decided to use his magic stones to upgrade the garden. As he spent the resources, the system notified him that his level had successfully increased. With new skills unlocked and fresh crops available, he scrolled through the window and wondered, what kind of skill is this? It appeared he had received the gift of the vegetable garden. Gio found the name a bit ridiculous and decided to pretend he hadn't seen it. Noticing his odd behavior, a perplexed Senna asked him what was wrong. She then mentioned that she would finally have a day off, starting tomorrow. The protagonist smiled, telling her that the timing was perfect. That's wonderful news. If that's the case, then you should invite the girls over for a massive feast. We can have a grand celebration to commemorate us finally clearing that dungeon. The protagonist spent the afternoon setting the table, and Senna couldn't help but exclaim that the entire spread looked absolutely magnificent. Enya was equally stunned, unable to believe he had prepared so much food. Gio credited Alicia for the help, noting that every ingredient came fresh from his magical garden. He encouraged them to eat as much as they wanted. Shifa smiled warmly in thanks, and the group raised their glasses to toast their hard-won victory in the volcano area. As they looked over the delicious meal, one of them exclaimed, "This hamburger steak looks incredible." Shifa agreed as the aroma filled the room. Senna immediately began carving into her portion, her mouth watering with every slice. Gio mentioned that he'd prepared the dish using rare, high-quality fermented cultures. However, as they took their first bites, he looked at them in total confusion. Everyone suddenly froze in place. Panicked, Annie jumped up from her seat. Shifa stood up as well, prompting Gio to worry if the food actually tasted terrible. But Senna finally spoke up, exclaiming that it was the best thing she'd ever eaten. It was so good it could make someone faint, and Annie admitted she couldn't stop eating. Shifa quickly finished her portion and reached for another, claiming she wanted to savor this flavor for the rest of her life. They were completely hooked, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The girls began begging for seconds, forcing the protagonist to try and calm them down. He warned them to control themselves, as these high-quality cultures were far more potent than average ingredients. Senna gushed over the meal, noting how the tender meat and crispy onions created a perfect harmony. Shifa added that the meat was incredibly juicy, while Annie agreed it was simply divine. Shifa noted that the quality was almost dangerous. If a shady organization got their hands on these ingredients, they could create something truly addictive. They warned Gio to keep his recipes safe. Despite the warning, Shifa smiled, thanking him for such a wonderful and delicious reward. Gio brushed it off, saying it was the least he could do since he truly values Senna's help. He acknowledged her immense talent, and Annie chimed in to support him. She credited their fast progress through the volcanic region entirely to Senna. As Senna laughed bashfully, Gio couldn't help but wonder just how powerful her gift really was. He previously assumed she was simply exaggerating about their struggles, but even though he was finally contributing, a lingering sense of envy remained. Shifa spoke up, expressing that she was deeply grateful not only to Senna, but to him as well. She admitted she didn't think they could have survived the volcanic zone or the boss without his ice potions. To her, he was a powerhouse in his own right. He felt a surge of pride knowing that his healing potions and logistical support were vital. Senna agreed, noting the dungeon's lower floors were brutal. The MC realized he truly was useful, just as Alicia told him to take a seat. She offered to handle the rest of the chores, leaving the MC to reflect. Even if he couldn't stand on the front lines as an adventurer, it seemed he had finally found a way to become a vital part of the team. A few minutes later, the feast was over. With the plates licked clean, the group sat back in a food coma. One of them groaned that they couldn't eat another bite, while Senna and Leo thanked Alicia. She beamed, noting that their empty plates were the highest praise for her cooking. When asked if they were heading back out, Shifa explained they were taking a well-deserved break. Annie offered to help out at the restaurant, much to the delight of Senna, who had been dozing off. The protagonist wondered what Shifa had in store for them next, especially after Annie saw the party off and shared her own thoughts. As they prepared to head home, he and Shifa went their separate way. Suddenly, she stopped him, mentioning that she had something important to say. She wanted to thank him, catching our hero completely off guard. For all the food and potions he provided, she felt truly indebted. He grew flustered, wondering if this meant she actually had feelings for him. Shifa then nervously asked if he'd like to go for a walk tomorrow. Gio was perplexed, his mind racing with a single exciting thought. Could this be a date? The next morning, Senna noticed him getting all dressed up. Gio confirmed his plans, gave Milky a quick pat, and left Senna in charge. He slipped away, silently apologizing in case he stayed out late. Today, it would just be him and Shifa. No distractions, no monsters. This was officially a date, and he hoped to visit some trendy spots. He was determined to make the most of this romantic atmosphere. When he finally spotted Shifa, she greeted him with a warm smile. He sheepishly returned the greeting, his heart pounding in his chest. He apologized for being late, but she reassured him that she'd only just arrived. As they exchanged pleasantries, Gio couldn't believe this was finally happening. When he asked where to go, she told him she had already planned everything. Gio turned away with a grin, thrilled that she had put so much effort into this. He was so overjoyed that he struggled to hide his massive smile. Without a doubt, today was going to be a legendary day. A few minutes later, the pair arrived at the local pharmacy. He double-checked, asking if this was really Marlene's shop. Shifa confirmed it and stepped inside, where Dennis greeted them warmly. He asked if they were out on their own or looking for something specific, but Shifa said they were just browsing. The protagonist glanced at Dennis, his expression making it clear that a dusty old building was hardly the ideal location for a date. This definitely wasn't a romantic hotspot, yet Shifa stood there, silently staring at the various items on the shelves. Regardless of where they were, he was just happy to be spending time with her. Still, he wondered what she was thinking until she turned and asked if he was having fun. He awkwardly agreed, realizing he'd been doing nothing but staring at her the entire time. After Dennis saw them out, Shifa mentioned they needed to find their way to the next shop. They soon arrived at an equipment store, further confusing him. He couldn't help but think that this place wasn't meant for dates either. Once again, she just stood there silently examining the gear. Was this actually normal? Having never been on a date, he figured most people went to fashion boutiques. He imagined her trying on cute dresses, but instead, a salesman approached them with a new arrival. Shifa tried on a set of heavy armor first, looking incredibly powerful, but she found it too cumbersome. To his shock, she decided to try on a set of bikini armor instead. She claimed the new set was much lighter, but the revealing look left him completely flustered. He frantically asked if it was a bit too scandalous, but she just wanted to know which one looked better. Seeing his red face, he quickly covered his eyes, shouting that it wasn't that he hated it. He just thought she looked much better in her regular clothes. Flushed with embarrassment from the compliment, her face turned a deep shade of crimson. As they left the shop, he offered to buy her something, but she politely declined. Their next stop was the Adventurers Guild, a place she insisted they needed to visit. Joe felt a wave of disappointment, realizing this was yet another location that wasn't exactly date material. She explained that the second floor housed an inn, while the basement was reserved for training. He agreed to take a look, and as they headed down, Shifa's presence immediately drew every eye in the room. Seeing the reactions, he realized just how famous she was. He was practically on a date with a local celebrity. His train of thought was broken by a veteran adventurer shouting at a recruit to focus. "If you keep shaking like that, the monsters will eat you for breakfast," the man roared. They stood by the sidelines, watching the intense drills as warriors honed their skills with various weapons. Joe watched with a growing sense of unease, his mind racing with doubt. He began to wonder if he was completely delusional about the nature of their outing. The more he analyzed the situation, the less it felt like a romantic date. It hit him that he might be the only one who viewed this as anything more than a friendly stroll. After all, she had only asked him to go for a walk, nothing more. Her true intentions remained a mystery, until she turned to him and asked if he was enjoying himself. Suddenly, his attention shifted to a group of men nearby egging their friend on to be bold. Joe watched intently, wondering if the man was actually about to confess his feelings to her. The man approached, bowed deeply, and loudly begged her to be his training partner. Much to Joe's surprise, Shifa began to respond, but Joe cut in, realizing he actually wanted to see her legendary skills in action. Accepting the challenge without hesitation, she brandished her spear against the swordsman. Our protagonist watched from the sidelines, eager to witness her combat prowess for the very first time. The opponent lunged forward with a fierce battle cry, determined to prove his strength. He closed the distance rapidly and unleashed a relentless flurry of strikes, but she countered his heavy blade with effortless grace. She parried every blow before finding a perfect opening. With a sudden, lightning-fast maneuver, she pivoted her spear and disarmed him with a single powerful strike. His weapon clattered to the floor as his defense crumbled instantly. Within seconds, he was on the ground with a spear tip pressed against his throat. Forced to concede, he admitted defeat as the MC looked on in pure awe. Her movements were fluid and mesmerizing, leaving him completely breathless. Seeing her in action was even more impressive than he had ever imagined. After the duel, Shifa graciously helped her opponent back to his feet. Another trainee approached, hoping to test her skills against the warrior, but Shifa politely declined, explaining that she had urgent matters to attend to today. She walked back to the MC, who asked if she was finally finished with her training. As they headed out, she asked if he was hungry, prompting him to suggest a nice cafe. They arrived at a restaurant where he silently hoped she'd go easy on his wallet. They headed back to the same spot they visited yesterday, where they were greeted by Annie. Stunned to see them, she immediately asked what they were doing there. Gio was equally surprised, remembering she had mentioned she'd be helping out at the restaurant. Shifa chimed in, simply stating they were there to eat, which caught Annie off guard. Processing the situation, Annie grabbed Gio's hand and pulled him aside, telling him she understood the situation, but that wasn't the issue at hand. She insisted he follow her, then demanded to know if he was really here alone with Shifa. When he confirmed it, she bluntly asked if they were on a date, to which he questioned why she even cared. Flustered and embarrassed, she stammered that she couldn't imagine any other reason for them to be together. A confused Gio explained that while Shifa picked the locations, it didn't feel like a romantic date at all. Annie noted they had ended up at her family's place, though Gio admitted he was having a good time regardless. Still, he couldn't quite figure out what was actually going on in Shifa's head. Annie turned her gaze toward Shifa, who was sitting peacefully at their table. Watching her stare contentedly out the window, Annie let out a sigh and teased Gio, telling him he still had a long way to go and that he was 100 years too early to date someone like her. Shaken by the comment, Gio shouted back in disbelief as Annie told him to just go sit down. She promised to take their order in a moment, leaving Gio to walk back to the table feeling dejected. He realized he might have been too arrogant. She was an elite adventurer and far beyond his reach. When he sat back down, Shifa asked what they discussed, but he simply replied it was nothing special. Scanning the menu, he couldn't help but feel that if this were an actual date, she would have chosen a more grand location. Suddenly, she called out his name, noticing that he looked completely drained of energy. She wondered if he was just exhausted, a question that momentarily caught him off guard. He admitted he was feeling a bit worn out, and she gazed back at him with a serene, calm expression. She told him not to worry, promising that a good meal would recharge his spirits in no time. Her straightforward nature caught him by surprise, making him realize how endearingly simple she could be. With a smile, he agreed it was time to eat, realizing the labels didn't really matter anymore. Even if it wasn't a formal date, he was just happy to spend time with her. As they stepped outside, she beamed, claiming Lucas was the finest restaurant she had ever known, perhaps even the best in the world. Her genuine enthusiasm made him realize just how special this place was to her. They both began to speak at the same time, leading to a clumsy moment of mutual apologies before he insisted she go first. She hesitantly asked if he was unhappy being with her, apologizing because she had struggled to pick the right locations. She feared she'd done a poor job, as her only goal was for him to enjoy himself. This outing was meant to be a gesture of her deepest gratitude for everything he'd done, but she admitted she had no idea how to actually entertain someone. In the end, she simply chose her favorite spots, hoping that by sharing what she loved, he would find joy in them too. Our protagonist was stunned, finally understanding the heartfelt logic behind her choices. Every stop today was a piece of her heart. Shifa then confessed that she'd originally considered taking him to a dungeon, but feared it was far too dangerous. He laughed, telling her she'd definitely made the right call. He was genuinely charmed by her unique way of showing appreciation and couldn't help but smile. Softly, she asked if he was truly having a good time. He nodded, telling her that as long as she was by his side, any destination was a blast. He started to feel a bit flustered, realizing his words sounded dangerously like a confession. She beamed at him, clearly touched, while he marveled at how she could be so eccentric yet fascinating. Seeing this new side of her made an already perfect day feel even more special. But did her casual reaction mean she had absolutely zero romantic interest in him? Before he could overthink it, she mentioned one final stop on their tour. When they arrived, he was stunned to realize they were standing right in front of her home. His face turned bright red as he wondered if she was introducing him to her parents, even though they'd met before. She led him inside, calling it one of her favorite spots in the world. As he followed her, he decided that as long as they were together, nothing else mattered. Suddenly, their peaceful moment was shattered by someone shouting for the boss. A frantic voice cried out with bad news, seemingly echoing from the back of the workshop. It finally clicked for him. Her family actually owned a blacksmithing business. Shifa rushed toward the noise and called out for her father, demanding to know what was wrong. Her dad, Philly, turned to greet her, but his eyes quickly landed on the boy standing beside her. After the protagonist introduced himself, Philly's eyes lit up. He gave him a heavy pat on the shoulder, laughing about how long it had been. But then, reality set in. His expression darkened, his fists clenched, and he roared, "Were you on a date with my precious daughter?" Shifa quickly stepped between them to de-escalate the situation and asked about the emergency. The shop worker chimed in, sounding defeated as he claimed that everything they worked for was lost. A man approaches with a smug grin, remarking on how noisy they're all being. He asks how the money situation is going, his eyes narrowing with intent. Kazuya reveals that's exactly why he's paid them a visit today. He claims he's just checking in, while subtly reminding them of a certain debt. Billy is 3 months behind on payments, leaving Gio wondering why he's indebted to such a creep. Visibly annoyed, Billy snaps back that he'll have the money soon enough. He explains that's exactly why they took on such a massive order. However, Shifa receives grim news from a worker. The merchant who placed that order has vanished. Kazuya sighs mockingly, asking if they really can't connect the dots yet. He feigns worry, wondering aloud if their precious merchant simply abandoned them. Shocked by the implication, Billy demands to know if Kazuya is the one behind this. The lender laughs it off, claiming he's just a legitimate businessman who's been more than patient. Watching the exchange, the MC realizes this entire situation looks incredibly dubious. Billy desperately pleads for more time, promising that he will eventually pay back every cent. Kazuya refuses, stating he's tired of waiting and is ready to seize the forge used as collateral. Billy shouts that this shop is his grandfather's legacy, but Kazuya simply doesn't care. Instead, he offers a sickening alternative to settle the debt. He suggests that Billy hand over his daughter instead. Everyone present is frozen in absolute shock by the cruel demand. Sensing the danger, the MC steps forward to shield the girl from the lender. He shouted at her, declaring he wouldn't waste a single second thinking about such ridiculous nonsense. She glared back at him with a chillingly serious expression. Her tone grew cold as she demanded he repeat what he just said. As Kazuya stepped toward him, a wave of anxiety washed over him. Realizing he'd spoken without thinking, Billy quickly raised his hand to signal a stop, noting they still had time before the scheduled meeting. He told him to head back for now, letting out a mocking laugh as he boasted about finally cornering his prey. He was given a strict 3-day deadline to scrounge up the cash. Meanwhile, a worker informed the boss of a startling discovery. Despite repeated inquiries, the Merchants Guild had no record of any merchant by that name, suggesting the entire order was a setup. He reached out to Gio, apologizing for dragging him into this mess. He then asked for an honest update on the current state of affairs. While they had talented craftsmen and loyal regulars, new clients were causing trouble, driving the business into the red and leaving him drowning his sorrows at a tavern. That was where a man approached him, introducing himself as a loan shark named Kazuya. "So that's how you two first met, right?" He agreed, explaining how a fake order eventually forced him into a predatory loan. The workers scoffed, calling Philly gullible and blaming him for their current predicament. Stunned, Philly demanded to know how he could possibly be responsible. They lacked any proof of his involvement, but regardless, the massive debt seemed impossible to repay. The protagonist analyzed the situation and realized something wasn't right. Why would they sabotage him instead of just extorting the money? It felt like they were actively preventing him from paying. Did they really want this old workshop that badly? He then recalled Shifa mentioning a potential reward she could use to settle the score. But with only 3 days remaining, it seemed like an impossible deadline to meet. He asked for the exact amount of the debt to see if he could cover it. He smiled, thinking he could help out if the sum was within a reasonable range. He figured he could spare the few dozen gold coins he had earned from his recent harvest sales. In response, the man held up 5 fingers, leading the MC to wonder if the debt was only 50 gold. However, to everyone's absolute shock, the man revealed the true, crushing figure. The debt was a staggering 500 gold coins. After hearing the news, they both left the workshop. Shifa sighed, apologizing to him for asking for his help in such a hopeless situation. He quickly reassured her, promising that he would do his absolute best to find a solution. She gave him a faint, grateful smile. As he walked away, he began to suspect that Shifa herself was the real target. He felt backed into a corner. Even if he sold all his remaining crops, he wouldn't make enough gold in time. He wondered if there was some hidden power or resource he could leverage during a crisis like this. He wanted to discuss the matter with Lily, but he had no idea where she had gone. She wasn't scheduled to arrive for the harvest until tomorrow morning, but he couldn't afford to wait that long. He decided his best bet was to head to the Merchants Guild and start digging for information. He approached the girl, who immediately apologized, explaining that the merchant was so elusive, even they didn't know her location. Stunned, he pressed her for at least a rough idea of where she might be. With urgent business at hand, he was desperate, but she reiterated she had no clue. Suddenly, the merchant herself appeared, calling out that this was an odd place for a meeting. He spun around with joy, calling her name and feeling incredibly lucky. He told her he was just looking for her, and noticing his distress, she asked what was wrong. They sat on a nearby bench as he explained the situation, and she agreed it sounded quite grave. Reaching into his pocket, he mentioned he had something important to show her. He pulled out a piece of ore, leaving her completely speechless. With a look of pure shock, she shouted, "Is this actually gold ore?" He casually mentioned he grew it in his garden and asked if selling a bunch of it would be enough to finally settle his massive debt. She stared at the ore in her hand with a deeply conflicted expression, admitting that things wouldn't be quite that simple. Since the lords control all gold mines, selling a large amount would get him arrested for illegal mining. Clutching his head in despair, he asked for a solution, prompting her to think deeply. She told him to give her a moment, then asked if he had any other types of ore. He confirmed he had a vast variety, so she asked if he happened to have the legendary mithril ore growing in his garden as well. Lily's eyes sparkle as she spots a massive cluster of mithril crystal. She explains that such high-grade ore only forms in areas with incredibly dense mana. Since it's typically found in dangerous dungeons, the MC asks if he should just sell it. Lily warns that selling such a rare metal would draw too much suspicion to them. When he asks for an alternative, she offers to handle the entire matter herself. The MC is still worried, reminding her that they only have 3 days to pay the debt. With a calm smile, she tells him not to stress and to leave everything to her. He eventually agrees, putting his full faith in her plan. Later, Billy looks over their meager earnings and realizes they've come up short. It's not even close to the full amount, and the weight of their failure sets in. It looks like they'll lose the workshop, leaving a worried Shifa at a loss for words. Suddenly, Lily approaches the group and offers a cheerful greeting to the struggling smiths. She introduces herself and explains that she wants to place a very specific order. Billy tells her they're closing shop, but she insists on paying the full amount in advance. She produces a bag and suggests they sit down to talk business before they close their doors. When she reveals the mithril ore, Billy is stunned by the sheer quantity she's carrying. In exchange for the ore, she wants to commission 200 sets of custom swords and shields. Shifa realizes this massive order provides more than enough gold to settle their outstanding debts. Billy remains skeptical, fearing a scam, which makes the MC realize how cautious the smith has become. Lily acknowledges his doubt, knowing that trust is hard to come by in their situation. This was her first major deal, yet she entrusted him with the entire responsibility. Her faith in him was clear. She called her father and assured him that everything was under control. She truly trusted him. He looked back at her, recalling their earlier encounter, and finally agreed to the terms. He thanked her for standing by him as they shook hands, sealing their new pact. He promised to do his absolute best, and she beamed, saying she was counting on him. She then handed over a heavy bag of payment. When he opened it, he found rare platinum coins. Shifa was stunned, noting that such currency was usually reserved for nobles and wealthy merchants. Even our hero was seeing them for the first time, wondering who actually commissioned this job. Suddenly, Billy rushed in, loudly proclaiming that they needed to strike while the iron was hot. He intended to confront Kazuya immediately. Looking worried, his daughter desperately called out to him, trying to stop his reckless advance. However, a group of men had already gathered outside. Their leader asked with a mocking smile, "What's the big rush?" He teased that Billy surely wasn't planning to skip town in the middle of the night. After all, it was payday, and a sudden disappearance would be problematic. Billy turned to his daughter and ordered her to stay back, fearing they were targeting her specifically. Gio agreed, telling her it was best to stay hidden in the workshop. The man asked with a smirk, assuming the debt hadn't been collected in time. However, just as he was about to gloat, he was suddenly interrupted. The protagonist cut him off, stating the debt was exactly 500 gold coins. While that should have been enough, the man's eyes widened when he saw the platinum coins. He stared at the money in his hand, stammering that it was impossible to get this much in 3 days. Lily stepped in, explaining that she had simply facilitated a high-stakes deal. He shot her a look of pure disdain, shocked that anyone could amass such a fortune so quickly. She tried to continue, but he suddenly looked up with a sinister glint in his eyes. He smiled coldly, claiming he had forgotten to calculate the accumulated interest. The group was stunned as he insisted that interest was a standard part of the agreement. He mocked them, claiming his generous delays now brought the total to 1,500 gold coins. They gasped in horror, realizing he was demanding triple the original amount. Billy was absolutely livid, shouting that these figures were complete and utter nonsense. The man, Kazuya, insisted the debt was legitimate, regardless of how they felt about it. He then declared the coins in the workshop weren't enough, He wanted Billy's daughter instead. The protagonist's blood boiled as he realized this was the villain's true motive all along. Their real target was Shifa. Billy exploded, swearing they'd only take her over his dead body. The man just maintained his creepy smile, telling Billy there was no need for such anger. He claimed they didn't want to use force, but his tone suggested otherwise. Before Billy could shout another word, the man stepped forward menacingly and demanded that they put an end to this immediately. He stepped forward, declaring that he would never allow this to continue. This unexpected defiance left the thugs absolutely livid. One of them prepared to retaliate, but was quickly silenced. Kaseya scoffed, recognizing the weakling who always got in the way. Why was he meddling? Did he have a death wish? Or was he just tired of living? Clenching his trembling fist, he shouted that his motives didn't matter. This had nothing to do with logic, it was about loyalty. Shifa was his precious friend. Hearing this, Kaseya let out a dark chuckle. He mocked the boy's resolve, admitting that he had quite the temper. He violently grabbed him by the collar and pulled him in tight. He raised a fist, asking if he was truly ready to endure the agony of reality. He was about to strike, but Lily suddenly intervened. Lily stepped into the fray, apologizing just to get their attention. As they turned, she searched her bag, stating she wasn't finished yet. She revealed her client was the ruler of these lands, brandishing the contract. Everyone present was paralyzed with shock at the sudden revelation. At that moment, the ruler sat in her office, contemplating her next move. She knew she couldn't just stand by and do nothing. She had to step in, leaving even the MC completely stunned. He was stunned, wondering if she actually meant the Lord of Arcel himself. Examining the seal, Kaseya confirmed its authenticity, warning that any extortion toward this workshop would go straight to the ruler's ears. It was clear this would spell disaster for them. Infuriated by the sudden shift in power, the man snatched the bag, begrudgingly accepting the reduced fee of 500 gold coins. With a bitter glare, he and his thugs finally retreated. As the tension broke, Gio collapsed to his knees in relief. The sheer weight of the confrontation had been overwhelming. Billy rushed over, asking if he was hurt, while Shifa called out his name, her voice trembling with concern as she ran to his side. Gio looked up and apologized for the chaos, though he was relieved the plan succeeded. Without a word, Shifa pulled him into a tight embrace, catching him completely off guard while the others watched on with knowing smiles. Beaming with gratitude, she told him her father's workshop was only safe because of him. Flustered by the affection, Gio quickly insisted that the credit belonged to Lily, whose connection to the ruler proved she was a truly elite merchant. Lily just smiled, brushing off the praise with a humble gesture. She was just happy to help someone who always puts others before themselves. Besides, she couldn't help but mention how cool he looked back there. Billy patted him on the back, declaring that he'd truly proven himself to be a noble knight. Flustered by the praise, our protagonist bashfully insisted that things just happened to turn out that way. Recalling the heat of the moment, he cringed at the thought of the bold things he'd said right in front of her. With a look of pure mortification, he sheepishly asked her about his earlier outburst, but she admitted that she actually hadn't heard a single word from that distance. Relief washed over him as he smiled, realizing that, in her eyes, he was the hero who saved them today. Shifa promised to properly show her gratitude soon. He simply chuckled, assuring her that no further thanks were necessary. Thinking back to their earlier encounter, he felt that her warm hug was more than enough of a reward. A sense of calm finally settled over him, though he couldn't help but reflect on his actions. Under normal circumstances, he never would have found the courage to stand up to such a terrifying opponent. But in the end, he was just happy that he managed to protect her precious smile. Meanwhile, Kaseya was in a far less pleasant mood. He stormed into an abandoned building, violently kicking the floor in a fit of rage. He screamed into the empty space, fuming over how a pathetic weakling had dared to interfere with his goals. His face twisted in disgust as he thought about the weeks of meticulous preparation that had just gone to waste. With the plan in ruins, he realized he couldn't possibly report this failure to the boss. Just then, an underling called to report that their target's base was nowhere to be found. However, he did stumble upon a notorious, supposedly haunted house nearby. It was the residence of a pair of siblings, and more importantly, it was exactly where their target was hiding. Smirking, Kaseya decided that was enough. He was itching for a fight and planned to use the boy as bait. Meanwhile, Marin proudly reveals her latest concoction. Dennis gazes at the vial, his eyes lighting up with genuine joy. He admires its stunning sky-blue hue and asks about its effects. Marin playfully suggests he try it himself, reminding him of his duties as an assistant. She hands him the vial, and without a second thought, Dennis downs the entire thing. Marin then produces a bucket of water and instructs him to submerge his face immediately. Dennis complies, and to his absolute shock, he realizes he can breathe perfectly fine beneath the surface. Gasping as he resurfaces, he exclaims how incredible it is. Marin explains it's a specialized potion brewed from rare air flowers. It allows someone to feel as comfortable underwater as they do on dry land. Dennis asks if Geo provided the flowers, noting they only grow at extreme altitudes of several thousand meters, making them incredibly scarce. Still, he can't help but wonder how Geo managed to source such rare components. As Marin tries to sneak away, Dennis catches her and calls her out. He demands to know what she plans to do with the leftover water and that specific bottle. Since he just drank from it, he insists she pour it out. Or better yet, he'll dispose of it himself to be safe. Marin refuses, claiming the water is for tonight and the bottle is now a precious family heirloom. Dennis is baffled, shouting at her for being so ridiculous. Just then, Shifa enters the shop, apologizing for the interruption as she greets them both. With Marin momentarily distracted, Dennis sees his opening. He quickly grabs the bucket and dumps the contents before she can stop him. Task complete. He turns to their guest with a bright, welcoming smile. Shifa senses the tension and asks if everything is all right, but Dennis dismisses it as nothing out of the ordinary. He asks if she needs something specific, and she confirms she's preparing for her upcoming journey. While Marin wipes away her dramatic tears, Dennis tells Shifa she arrived at the perfect time to test their newest creation. Shortly after our protagonist called Milky over, announcing it was finally time for lunch. The creature dashed toward him, excited for his favorite meal, a plate of fried mackerel. Senna watched them, noting how much the little guy had grown lately. He agreed, remarking that Milky was maturing at an incredible rate. It was likely because he'd moved past a simple diet of milk to more solid food. She marveled at his size, noting he'd become far too massive for her to carry in her arms anymore. Even so, he knew this cat was technically still a monster. But since Milky was so attached to him, he didn't feel any sense of danger. Senna watched the two bond and decided she wanted to pet the creature as well. However, the moment she reached out, Milky began to growl aggressively at her. It seemed the beast didn't share the same affection for her, leaving her quite dejected. He quickly changed the subject, reminding her they had a dungeon to raid today. Realizing she needed to hurry, she finished her meal and asked which area they would be venturing into for their next big exploration. Upon arriving at the entrance, she looked around in total disbelief. She questioned if an underwater dungeon could truly exist in a place like this. Rifa confirmed her suspicions, noting the environment put them at a major disadvantage, as they wouldn't be able to breathe naturally while submerged. To solve this, she produced a special potion that would allow them to survive the depths, ensuring they could explore the sunken ruins with ease. Since no one had ever conquered this place, Annie hoped her specialized potion would be their edge. After downing the brew, the party dove headfirst into the dark depths. To her absolute shock, Annie realized the potion's effects were immediate. She could actually breathe beneath the waves as easily as she did on land. Shifa was equally stunned, noting how effortlessly she could move along the seabed. Even more impressive was their ability to communicate. Just as a massive monster drew near, it seemed her hunting instincts were just as sharp underwater as they were above. Senna was the first to spot the gargantuan beast lurking in the shadows. She calmly noted that their first opponent was an exceptionally large predatory fish. Without a moment's hesitation, she drew her blade with cold precision. With total composure, she cleaved through the shark in a single decisive strike. Watching the display, Shifa remarked that her swordsmanship hadn't lost a bit of its lethality. Marin's potions were flawless, clearly benefiting from the rare ingredients Jin provided. Since this was uncharted territory, they lacked even the most basic intel. To navigate the abyss, they would have to map out every inch of the labyrinth themselves. The group pressed deeper, venturing further into the heart of the dungeon. They carved through waves of monsters while meticulously charting their progress. Eventually, they stumbled upon a hidden cavern overflowing with vibrant coral. The sheer, untouched beauty of the underwater flora left the entire party speechless. As they descended, a wide-eyed Shifa marveled at the sights while Annie scanned for danger. Looking around, she remarked that if this weren't a dungeon, it would be a prime tourist hotspot. However, they had to stay alert for lurking monsters. Senna wandered further, noting exotic fish even her brother hadn't raised. She wondered if they were edible, but Shifa warned her that raising monsters was a recipe for disaster. Shifa admitted they weren't overly dangerous, but she still cautioned against underestimating them. He noted that while the lack of oxygen makes this dungeon a nightmare, Water-breathing potions make the conquest surprisingly trivial. Suddenly, Senna spotted something. She pointed toward the distance, urging the others to take a look. There, looming in the depths, they spotted a massive creature. They wondered aloud, could this be the area's boss? It certainly looked like the ruler of this entire submerged zone. Meanwhile, our protagonist was still sound asleep at home. He was resting peacefully, unaware that a group of thugs was approaching his house. They whispered that since his adventurer sister was away today, it was the perfect time to strike. Their goal was to snatch the weakling and get out fast. They kicked the door in, instantly waking Milky. The pet began to growl, tugging at the protagonist's sleeve until he finally stirred. Confused, he asked what was wrong, only to see the front door swinging open. He immediately realized that this definitely wasn't Senna returning home. Two mysterious men stormed into the house, but Milky wasn't about to let them pass. The loyal pet charged forward and clamped its jaws onto one of the intruders. The man let out a piercing scream as teeth sank deep into his leg. He cursed, wondering why there was a cat in the house before drawing a lethal blade. He prepared to strike the animal, but the MC caught sight of the weapon and prepared to intervene, screaming a frantic warning about the impending danger. He swiftly evaded the strike and delivered a devastating blow with his razor-sharp claws to the next assailant. Terrified, the men realized this was no ordinary house cat. Fearing for their lives, they retreated as he sat on the bed, staring at the door in confusion. He checked on Milky to see if the cat was injured, but the feline simply meowed, urging him toward the garden. Sprinting out of the house, he was immediately spotted by the pursuers. They shouted to the group, alerting everyone that their target was now cornered in the yard. Watching them approach with drawn weapons, he realized he was in serious trouble. If they captured him now, his fate would be sealed. But Milky meowed with confidence. The cat seemed to tell him not to worry, for powerful allies were already arriving. Right on cue, massive golems materialized from the earth and began a brutal assault on the mercenaries, leaving the young man speechless. He shouted in disbelief, wondering how such creatures could appear in a place like this. The attackers tried to stay calm, but the golems continued to emerge from the ground, causing the men's confidence to crumble into pure panic. They scrambled in terror, unable to keep track of the sheer number of constructs surrounding them. Their leader demanded to know why catching one weakling was proving to be so difficult. As the golems swarmed, Gio watched the chaos unfold from behind a nearby tree. He wondered if another player had joined the fray, drawing his sword as he prepared for a fight. With a single swift strike, he shattered the golem lunging at him. Glaring at the others, he demanded answers. Are they really struggling with these mere lumps of clay? Is this supposed to be some kind of joke? Love looked on in shock, wondering if the man had come for revenge. He had dispatched the golem in the blink of an eye. The warrior yelled that no matter how many times they're struck down, these things just keep getting back up. Kazuya pulverized another golem with his blade, shouting for everyone to clear a path and get out of his way. He then spotted our protagonist lurking behind a tree and barked a question. Was this his handiwork? He warned that no matter how many monsters he summoned, it would all be in vain. As the MC and Milky turned to flee, Kazuya pursued them, mocking their pathetic attempt to escape. How dare they waste his precious time? But his bravado vanished when he caught sight of something massive. A colossal golem loomed over him, peering out from behind a massive tree. He charged toward the behemoth with reckless abandon. He swung his blade with all his might, but the result was disastrous. To his horror, his sword shattered upon contact. Panic instantly took hold of him. Terrified, he spun around with a nervous laugh, stammering that this had to be some kind of sick joke. Dropping his useless hilt, he collapsed to the ground in a heap. He whimpered, desperately wondering where all these monsters were coming from. Watching the chaos unfold from the sidelines, our protagonist had initially been impressed by the man's overwhelming strength. He was shattering golems with single blows, but Milky quickly snapped him out of his trance. He realized she was right, and decided they needed to put some serious distance between themselves and the fight. As they began their retreat, he desperately scrambled to find a solution. His current golems couldn't even slow the enemy down. There had to be another way. Suddenly, a system notification flashed, offering him the chance to summon a Mega Guardian. Still sprinting, he realized he hadn't even tested this particular skill yet. With his options rapidly dwindling, he decided it was time to give it a shot. A colossal golem materialized, and he immediately asked the system if he could summon more. Upon confirmation, he brought 3 more Mega Guardians into existence. Kazuya watched in sheer disbelief as the behemoths rose from the earth. He was completely overwhelmed by the sheer scale of these massive golems. Leo was equally stunned, never imagining his comrade possessed such overwhelming power. It was fortunate they were under the cover of night, as the enemy's weapon shattered. Staring at his broken blade, the intruder looked on with a grim and terrified expression as the MC prepared to end the fight. He mentally commanded the giants to hurl the intruder far away from the site. A golem snatched the man up, sending him into a total state of panic as he desperately begged for his life. Ignoring his pleas, the golem slammed him ruthlessly into the earth, and the impact was so violent that the ground cracked beneath him. The force was so immense that he was instantly knocked unconscious. The group quickly gathered the fallen foe while shouting for the others to move. Maldi declared that this entire place was absolute madness. This was no garden. It was a death trap they needed to flee immediately. He urged them to leave, convinced that nothing good would come from staying. Standing there with a worried expression, he asked if the threat was gone, and the massive golem beside him nodded in confirmation. Milky rubbed against his leg, purring with a contented look as he gently stroked the cat's head. He thanked his companions, admitting he didn't know what he would do without them by his side. Meanwhile, deep within the treacherous underwater zone, as they approached the surface, Annie looked visibly displeased. She couldn't believe her eyes. The boss had turned out to be a truly colossal nightmare. Senna, looking stunned, estimated it was at least 100 meters long and regretted taking these unfamiliar territories so lightly. Shifa tentatively asked if they even stood a chance at defeating such a monster. Senna raised her hand, but only to comment on how delicious the beast looked, prompting the others to tell her to focus. Annie sighed, ultimately agreeing with the sentiment that everything had gone surprisingly well so far. They still needed to finish the map before returning, though they decided to avoid the boss for the time being. They agreed that the creature's massive size made it easy to track, and they still had the advantage of Annie's gift. As they prepared to drink their potions, she couldn't help but feel that for a monster that size, something was off. Its presence felt strangely distorted, but she brushed it off as they submerged back into the water. After deciding they had explored enough, they finally turned back toward the surface, relieved to be heading home. As they began their departure, she reminded the group to stay sharp. They couldn't afford to let their guard down until they were safely back. As they brainstormed a strategy for their next boss encounter, the atmosphere suddenly shifted. A colossal shadow emerged from the depths, gliding ominously toward them. Annie stood paralyzed with shock, her mind racing as she wondered how such a massive creature could have appeared so instantly. Her heightened hunter's senses hadn't picked up a thing. Senna, pale with fear, screamed for them to retreat, and the group immediately bolted. However, the aquatic behemoth was relentless in its pursuit. It unhinged its gargantuan maw, beginning to siphon in a massive vortex of water. Annie looked back in horror, realizing they were seconds away from being swallowed whole. Suddenly, Shifa stopped in her tracks and stood her ground, turning to confront the beast directly. Staring down the monster, she calmly noted that it wasn't nearly as terrifying as the volcano. As she channeled her ability, Annie realized she was witnessing the Empress's true power. It's a divine gift that saps an enemy's strength, though its potency wanes against stronger foes. Against such a titan, it should have been useless, but Senna spotted a strange flaw. She pointed urgently toward the beast, shouting for them to look closer. Annie squinted at the monster and gasped. Was its massive body actually falling apart? Shifa maintained a focused gaze as she analyzed the phenomenon. She quickly realized the truth. This wasn't one singular massive organism. It was actually a coordinated school of small fish mimicking a giant predator. Staring in surprise, she finally realized the reason for the deception. It was why his presence was so faint that it had completely evaded her senses. Drawing their weapons, they realized the entire encounter had been a mere charade. They couldn't afford to be careless, as there was likely a hidden threat. A leader was surely lurking among them, a big fish she intended to handle. While she took them all on at once, she promised to provide the necessary support. Activating her ability, she commanded the small fry to bow before her. Senna then unleashed a barrage of rapid strikes with her blade. As she tore through the school, Annie noted with a smirk that her power had them cornered. Their movements turned sluggish, allowing the girls to thin their numbers one by one. Amidst the fodder, a massive creature emerged, watching them with predatory intent. A swarm of fish suddenly lunged forward, forcing the girls to halt their offensive. Shifa shielded herself as the school rushed them, realizing she couldn't keep her gift active. The swarm circled back for another pass, prompting Senna to shout a warning. She raised her hand once more, demanding they submit, but her power wavered. Unable to maintain her ability, the group was slammed by the relentless tide of fish. Reeling from the impact, they cried out, realizing the situation had turned dire. If these continuous waves didn't stop, they weren't going to last much longer. Suddenly, Senna spotted a fish that stood out from the rest of the pack. She lunged with her sword, demanding to know if it was the one pulling the strings. As the predatory fish finally scattered, Annie sighed in relief, noting how they all suddenly dispersed. Surveying the area, Shifa asked if the coast was clear, explaining that the moment she struck down that specific fish, the rest of the school fled in chaos. The group approached her, examining the carcass as they realized the truth. That monster was undoubtedly the alpha controlling the swarm. They wondered how she even managed to spot it amidst the frenzy. With a satisfied grin, she explained that she simply caught a glimpse and moved on instinct. She had sliced the beast clean in half, leaving the others in awe of her unrivaled combat prowess once again. When asked if this beast was the zone's boss, Shifa agreed, noting that despite its unassuming size, looks could be deceiving, as its power was undeniable. Massaging her aching shoulders, Annie groaned that her entire body was sore. Exhausted from the battle, they decided it was finally time to head back and report their success to the guild. Upon their arrival, Canaria greeted them warmly, mentioning they were just in time before asking how the mission went. She shared some incredible news. Because they had successfully conquered the volcanic region, their reputation was soaring. A high-profile individual wanted to meet them, but Shifa interrupted, casually mentioning they had just finished conquering the water region as well. At first, Canaria remained perfectly calm. However, once the weight of the words sank in, she shrieked in disbelief, demanding Shifa repeat herself. Staring at the jar containing the alpha fish, she stood speechless, baffled by how they achieved something so unprecedented in such a short amount of time. This meant they were guaranteed an incredibly prestigious reception. The man who requested their presence was none other than Lord Arcel. The group was stunned by the revelation, shouting in shock to confirm if it was true. Canaria nodded, confirming their official invitation to the royal castle. For commoners like them, meeting such a powerful ruler was a once-in-a-lifetime event. It felt as unattainable as reaching for the stars, but Canaria smiled, knowing their recent conquests made it possible. Since the conquest of the volcanic region, the area has become a hotspot for elite adventurers. This surge in activity is sparking massive economic growth, thanks to the influx of rare raw materials. For the first time, the ruler has requested a meeting with such young adventurers to honor their massive contributions. Shifa humbly redirected the praise, stating their success was only possible thanks to the apothecary's ice potions. She added with a smile that the apothecary had also received an invitation to the palace. Remembering her extreme social anxiety, the group wondered how the shut-in would handle such overwhelming news. When Senna asked about her brother, Annie immediately silenced her before she could reveal too much. She claimed his garden was a strict secret, and Canaria agreed that maintaining his privacy was for the best. They were officially summoned to the castle for dinner in 5 days. Shifa agreed, noting they needed a break after the underwater region. Senna was overjoyed by the news, relieved that they would finally get some well-deserved rest. As they parted ways, she reminded them that they would all reunite in 5 days for the banquet. She walked away with a look of pure bliss, proud of the reputation she had built as a high-ranking adventurer. Now she could finally kick back and let her brother pamper her for a while. Meanwhile, Milky paced the room with a grim expression. The protagonist noticed that ever since the incident, his companion hadn't relaxed for a second. He had no way of knowing if their enemies had truly retreated or were simply regrouping. There was a constant, lingering fear that they would return for a second, more coordinated attack. Pacing nervously, he realized Senna was late, causing his anxiety to spike even further. Had they actually kidnapped her? Just as panic began to set in, he heard the sharp creak of the door opening. Milky immediately lunged toward the sound, while the protagonist braced himself, fearing the intruders were back. However, the person at the door easily blocked Milky's bite, asking in shock why he was suddenly attacking. Senna called out to her brother to announce her return, and he was visibly relieved to see her safe. He rushed to greet her, noting she was much later than usual. She explained that something unexpected had occurred, but she planned on resting for a few days. He calmed Milky down, assuring the creature that Senna was family, not a foe. The golem settled instantly, but Senna noticed her brother's tension and asked what had happened while she was away. They sat down at the table, and as she prepared to eat, the atmosphere grew heavy. He recounted the night's terrors, leaving her stunned. She nearly choked on her food, shouting, "You were attacked?" She frantically checked him for injuries, but he reassured her that Milky and the golems had successfully driven them off. Despite the victory, He admitted that they hadn't been able to sleep a wink since the encounter. The constant dread of a second wave of attackers kept them both on high alert. Senna's expression darkened as she realized the gravity of the situation. This was no minor scuffle. It was a serious threat. She demanded to know exactly who the attackers were. He described their leader, a rugged, bald man with sharp features and distinct, intimidating tattoos. He warned her that the man was a master swordsman who decimated golems with ease, urging her to barricade her doors. Senna simply smiled, telling him not to worry. Unlike him, she was more than capable of defending herself. Indignant, he reminded her that she was still a rookie adventurer, but her casual attitude only made him more anxious. She then mentioned an upcoming meeting with the city's ruler. Horrified, he shouted, "What did you do this time?" Offended, she snapped back that he had it all wrong. She had actually been formally invited for the following day. Later, he headed outside to use the magic stones Senna brought to fortify the garden, wondering if she was finally asleep. If she was going to push herself as an adventurer, he'd do everything in his power to protect her. The mega golems were strong, but they were too conspicuous for daytime use. He needed a more discreet way to drive those freaks away for good. The system confirms the magic stones have been absorbed, granting him a new skill to cultivate advanced crops. Dismissing the invisible wall as a minor threat, he suddenly recalls something crucial. He remembers a unique skill he acquired previously but has never actually put to the test. Inspecting the garden movement ability, he wonders if teleportation is his ticket to freedom. Suddenly, a system prompt appears, asking if he wishes to travel between gardens. He accepts, but the system denies the request for the time being. Confused by the rejection, he questions when the skill will be available before checking his other options. He selects the movement skill again, and this time, the system asks if he wants to enter movement mode. Upon confirming, the entire world begins to tremble violently. Milky is terrified by the sudden quakes. Looking outside, he notices the neighbor's house appears to have shrunk. Panicking, he rushes to the exit, praying that his eyes are just playing tricks on him. Stepping outside, he's stunned to find that his entire house has physically shifted its position. Terrified by the unintended consequences, he desperately shouts for the system to undo the change. He stares at his relocated home in utter disbelief, his mind racing as the reality sets in. He quickly realizes that despite the chaos, this is an incredibly formidable ability. However, using this garden movement to escape is out of the question. Moving a whole house would draw more attention than a fleet of mega golems. Retreating back to the garden, he sighs, realizing his new powers are a double-edged sword. These high-level skills are proving to be far more problematic than he anticipated. Turning his attention back to farming, he hopes to cultivate something truly legendary. But as he scrolls through the available flower list, his excitement quickly turns into deep disappointment. Gio collapsed to his knees, his expression filled with frustration. Letting out a heavy sigh, he looked down in disappointment. He muttered that none of his efforts would ever be enough for the challenges ahead. Just then, Milky approached. She gently licked his cheek to comfort him. Gio looked at his companions and realized they were doing their best to lift his spirits. A small smile formed as he stood up, thanking them for their support. With a sudden shift in tone, Gio told them that if another crisis arose, they needed to be ready to handle it. He was relying on them. But his bravado quickly faded, as he admitted he was still feeling incredibly anxious. Clenching his fist, he reminded himself that with Senna here, fear was no longer an option. He swore to protect her at all costs. Unbeknownst to him, she was standing nearby, listening to every word before silently slipping away. Deciding it was time to start the day, Gio went to wake her up. He reached her room and turned the handle, suddenly remembering that he had specifically told her to barricade the door for safety. Stepping inside, he was shocked to find the room completely empty. At that exact moment, across town, Zaya was prowling through a dark alleyway with a look of pure disgust. She wore a fierce expression, frustrated by how weak her targets were. That weakling was going to pay for everything he'd lost. He recalled the mocking smirks of his peers, asking how the target managed to escape. Despite having every advantage, he couldn't even handle a child. It was easy for them to talk, but they hadn't faced those golems themselves. They wouldn't have stood a chance. Stripped of his rank and betrayed by his own subordinates, his life was now in ruins. Since being exiled from the organization, he was effectively a dead man walking. Seeking vengeance, he approached the house and peered around the corner, blaming the weakling for his downfall. He couldn't just barge into a strange house, so he decided to wait for the boy to emerge. That's when he spotted Senna. A sinister grin crept across his face as he remembered the boy lived with his adventurer sister, a young, capable girl She would be the perfect leverage. He trailed her to a secluded alleyway, realizing this was the golden opportunity he needed. Cornering her, he sneered that she'd better stay quiet if she valued her life. Senna instantly recognized him. She turned toward him with a chilling smile, asking if he was the one who hurt her brother. The man felt a surge of unease at her unnatural composure, wondering why she wasn't trembling. He scoffed, realizing her brother must have warned her. This just made things easier. Now, she would do exactly as he commanded. However, she flatly refused. Enraged, he drew his blade and demanded, "Do you not realize the danger you're in?" Senna simply continued to smile, and retorted that he was the one who failed to realize the gravity of his own situation. Without warning, she delivered a lightning-fast strike with her blade, forcing him to drop his weapon. Stunned by the sudden onslaught, he looked down to find a deep crimson gash across his hand. He desperately tried to stem the bleeding, wondering how he could be hit by an attack he never even saw. Flicking the blood from her steel, she coldly noted that he had threatened her brother. Terrifying her family is an unforgivable sin that robs them of their peace, and for that, he would pay. Overcome with pure terror, the man collapsed to his knees. He pathetically begged for mercy as Senna stepped closer. She leveled her sword at his throat and issued a final ultimatum. If he ever approached her brother again, it would be his last mistake. As he stared up at her in absolute horror, he realized that picking a fight with these people was a death wish. Later, she returned home to find the MC frantically calling out for her. He demanded to know where she had been, his voice laced with panic. She remained perfectly composed, claiming she was just out for a short walk. Worried sick, he reminded her that it's too dangerous to wander alone, fearing she might have been ambushed. He was floored when she casually mentioned that she ran into that bald thug from earlier. She told him not to worry, as the man promised never to bother them again. She offered a gentle smile to ease his mind, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Still, he couldn't help but wonder why the thug gave up so easily. Was he holding back, or was she truly just that absurdly powerful? She asks with a playful smile, telling him he can finally relax while she gets some rest. He approaches her, giving her a gentle head pat as he thanks her for her help. But he warns her that she shouldn't push herself to such dangerous extremes. She looks back at him with a grin and tells him there's no need to worry. No matter what happens, she vows that she will always be there. She promises to protect him forever, leaving him feeling a bit conflicted. He laughs, admitting he's unsure how to feel about his little sister being his bodyguard. She assures him it's fine, teasing that it's only natural since he's so kind and weak.